Chapter 568. In a silver-white bedroom, a black-haired young man lay on the bed and stared at the woman in front of him. His brain couldn't process what was going on. To be honest, Luo didn't know much about the Black Moon. The people in the Divine Tower couldn't analyze the power structure of the Mother Goddess for him. But even so, Luo understood that it must be an extremely important part of the Mother Goddess. Luo didn't want to see the Mother Goddess pay the price for his reckless injuries. Looking at the silver-haired woman in front of him, the black-haired young man felt extremely uncomfortable. After thinking for a moment, Luo couldn't help but ask softly, "It's a part of my remnant power in the past. But it's not a good part. To a certain extent, it's an evil part. Yes. Just as everyone has good and evil, so do the gods. But as the primordial goddess, too much good and too much evil will cause harm and interfere with judgment. So when the past Shi created the world, she gathered all of these together and made a certain classification." Hearing the Mother Goddess's answer, the black-haired young man couldn't help but be stunned. But Luo didn't expect the Mother Goddess to look at him with a meaningful gaze. Then, Luo widened his eyes as if he had sensed something. One was to transform it into different natural sceneries or laws, just like the Black Moon. The other was to share it with the lives that were created at that time. Speaking of Shia's close ministers at that time, there were only two of them. Yes. In the past, I shared the power with inclination with the two children I created first. And later on, they became the ancestors of their respective races. Among them, you are the ones who are more inclined to good. Hearing the Mother Goddess's answer, the black-haired young man couldn't help but widen his eyes again. Even though Luo had expected this, he still couldn't remain calm. But after thinking about it carefully, Luo felt that it was only natural. In such a position, it was impossible not to have all kinds of temptations around him. The intensity of the temptations might even be far beyond imagination. If he was not a just, kind, and righteous person, he might easily fall into a trap and be corrupted. In Luo's previous life, most of the ways to get rich were in the criminal law. For the chosen kings, it was actually very easy for Luo to make a meteoric rise. After all, in this world dominated by strength, the strength of the chosen kings was too obvious compared to the average human. It could be said that the chosen king's strength was reduced. However, if the selection of the king had a preference for kindness, then the selection of the king from generation to generation could be explained. But after thinking through this point, another question arose in Luo's mind. "Mother, is this kind of kindness forced? And what exactly does good refer to?" "No, it's not like that. This power isn't forceful, it's just inclined. Yes, just like how some people are born to be good and some are born to be evil. The influence of my power is only to make the chosen kings belong to the former. But in fact, the true formation of a person's character is mostly not innate, but acquired." "You can say that. But what kind of person you will become in the end depends on you. If it was only this kind of influence, it was indeed not serious, and it was far from the level of control. After all, a kind child's character could change greatly due to acquired influence, and a naughty child's character could also be changed through education." Thinking of this, the black-haired young man's expression calmed down. After clarifying this point, the Mother Goddess answered Luo's second question. Chapter 569. In the room, the black-haired young man listened to Mother Goddess' words and fell into deep thought. Mother Goddess had clearly said that she had never given birth. With her status, Luo couldn't think of anyone who could mate with her. After eliminating this possibility, the black-haired young man had no clue. After all, he was familiar with history and knew that what followed was a long war. Based on the fact that Savior had fallen into madness, if the Black Moon really had a soul and power of its own as the Mother Goddess had said, wouldn't the Black Moon's fall affect not only Savior but also a portion of humans, perhaps even forming a life form that was more advanced than the 6 calamities? Thinking of this, the black-haired young man's expression became complicated. According to this line of thought, it was understandable why Ari Lee's speed of advancement and spells were so abnormal. After understanding this, Luo also fell into a complicated trap. Luo was puzzled, But after careful consideration, Luo Yue rejected this possibility. Originally, the two of them were only adopted siblings, but if this was the case, they would become like biological siblings. This was too big a blow for Luo Yue, who cared about these things. But after serious consideration, Luo Yue rejected this possibility. Young man, this is not a good test, you can't control it. Luo Yue, who figured this out, let out a sigh of relief. On the other side, Mother Goddess noticed something and gently let go of Luo Yue's hand. She stared at his body with a heavy expression. Hey! Mother, what are you talking about? Don't worry. This is the soul's rejection reaction, it's also a normal phenomenon. Don't worry, Mother won't leave, just leave it to me. Hearing Mother Goddess's assurance, the black-haired young man nodded slightly and slowly closed his eyes. After a few seconds, Luo Yue's consciousness fell into darkness again. After Luo Yue fainted on the bed, the silver-haired woman looked at the young man, who fell into a deep sleep again. The smile on her face slowly disappeared and gradually turned into worry. Luo Yue's situation was actually far less optimistic than Mother Goddess had said. This could be seen from the treatment time. However, after that, the Mother Goddess's healing of the youth's soul did not go smoothly, and the most important reason was that there was something wrong with Luo Yue's soul. After the adjustment of the crown, source substance, the soul of the chosen king wouldn't reject Shi Yue. This was Shi Yue's original goal, a key part of the inheritance plan, and an unchangeable law. However, reality proved that the effects of this on Luo Yue weren't very ideal. The Mother Goddess was curious about this, but she could only attribute it to the fact that Luo Yue's soul was severely damaged. Apart from that, Luo Yue's origin substance also seemed to be different from the pure crown. However, the Mother Goddess wasn't sure about this yet. After a moment of waiting, the Mother Goddess's headache eased slightly. Then, her red eyes flashed with confusion because this wasn't the first time such a headache had occurred. For the Mother Goddess, who had never felt any discomfort in her body, this was the first time. After thinking for a long time, the Mother Goddess shook her head and muttered to herself. She temporarily put her matter aside and planned to continue maintaining Luo Yue's state. However, just as she reached out to the youth, a spell fluctuation came from the corner of the room. Chapter 570. In the garden under the moonlight, Luo Yue Akut felt the warmth in his arms. His heart was filled with the warmth of a family member. The flowers in the garden bloomed under the moonlight. They bloomed around the two of them as if they were celebrating their reunion after so many years in their own way. The day of the king's birth wasn't very important to Luo Yue, but if the Mother Goddess who always cared about him was happy, the black-haired boy didn't mind celebrating another birthday. Yes, I thought it would be better for you to appear on this day. It can be a surprise. Also, after you defeated the Savior in the last war, the future has changed. The ending is basically decided. It's time to make some preparations. Hearing the words of the Mother Goddess, the black-haired boy blinked slightly. For a moment, he didn't know what the Mother Goddess was talking about. Thinking of this, the boy looked at the Mother Goddess with some doubts. And as if she understood Luo Yue's confusion, the silver-haired woman showed a doting smile on her face. Mother, what do you mean? No, wait, this is too sudden. Stroking the cheek of her favorite child, the silver-haired woman smiled. Mother Goddess, purpose? Isn't it to help my body recover even more? Ah, could it be? Yes, although the main purpose is to let your body recover better, I can think of other ways without their help. My real purpose is to let you get in touch with them. Hearing the Mother Goddess's answer, Luo Yue showed a bitter smile. Since they met, this was the first time he felt the Mother Goddess's careful thoughts and means. As for how to appreciate it, with this kind of relationship, they will spontaneously support you to maximize the benefits of the relationship exchanged with the treasure of their race. In addition to your original merits and the reputation of the king's selection, inheriting my position won't be as difficult as imagined. The silver-haired woman said so. She carefully planned a route for Luo Yue. Her red eyes were filled with expectations for the future. However, seeing the Mother Goddess like this, the black-haired boy fell into silence. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. Recalling the situation outside the historical fragment, the black-haired boy's heart suddenly became heavy. And the mother goddess who looked at Luo Yue naturally noticed this. Her expression also became nervous. Hey! No, I'm fine. Hearing Luo Yue's answer, mother goddess heaved a sigh of relief. She wanted to ask why Luo Yue had such a heavy expression, but before she could speak, the black-haired boy spoke first as if he was trying to hide something. Is that so? Hihi, perhaps that's the case. After all, whenever I think about how this kind of life can continue, I feel happy from the bottom of my heart. Looking at the mother, the black-haired boy's eyes widened as he felt pain in his heart. On the other side, the silver-haired woman couldn't know what Roha was thinking. She recalled the past with a sad smile on her face. No, mother. All of this happened because I was deceived. Mother was wrong in the past. It's a miracle that you're able to return to my side. But although the past can't be changed, I'm willing to use the future to make up for it. Yep, I'm no longer Shi-Ya. It's time to pay back what I owed you in the past. In the future, I won't pretend to forget your birthdays. I'll spend them with you just like I am now. When you're busy with work and exhausted, I won't ignore you anymore. Instead, I'll encourage you just like I do now. The silver-haired woman's crimson eyes gradually lit up as she spoke. And as she described, Luo Yue also vaguely saw a dreamlike scene. If only it could come true. And for Luo Yue, reality was even crueler. Thinking of this, Luo Yue closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The bitterness in his heart was somewhat unbearable. Back then, he made the right choice to help the mother goddess. This was something that Luo Yue didn't think was wrong. But as usual in this world, the right choice often didn't bring about beautiful results. Did she not like this topic? Luo Yue, actually, apart from your birthday, I brought you here for another reason. Yes, you should feel it as well. Something is missing in your body. The black-haired young man said as he had a thought. The mother goddess nodded slightly in response. Fusing was easy, but separating was difficult. It was just like how it was difficult to collect dye after it was poured into water. And without the source substance, Luo Yue's power would be greatly affected. But fortunately, the mother goddess was by his side, so everything could be resolved. Mother. I'm sorry for making you worry. The silver-haired woman shook her head and helplessly ended the topic of their apologies. She reached out her hand and touched her chest, while Luo Yue obediently stretched out his hands and waited. I see. It was a miraculous creation that looked like a crystal, but it wasn't crystal clear. It exuded a dreamy brilliance, and the moment it appeared, Luo Yue's blood began to fluctuate violently. Even his soul seemed to have sensed it. The moment the source substance entered his body, Luo Yue's heart surged with a strong sense of relief. His blood had found its core, and a part of his soul had also been replenished. But what the young man didn't expect was that at this moment, a familiar voice suddenly rang out. The source substance recovery has been completed. Restarting after returning. 30:29:28. Luo Yue, who was completely disrupted by the sudden countdown, panicked. He hurriedly raised his head and wanted to use the last of his time to say something to the mother goddess. But what he didn't expect was that the silver-haired woman covered her forehead with a bitter expression. I'm fine, just a little dizzy. Wait. Who are you? Looking at the young man in front of her, the silver-haired woman slowly widened her eyes and asked such a question. Hearing the words of the mother goddess, Luo Yue's body suddenly stiffened, and then he immediately discovered the problem. The black-haired young man who discovered the truth of the matter suddenly widened his eyes. For a moment, he stood still and didn't know what to do. Without the ability to substitute, the fact that Luo Yue didn't choose the king would be exposed. No matter how hard he struggled, there was nothing he could do. And the mother goddess had obviously discovered it. Thinking of this, the young man suddenly felt exceptionally sad. He unwillingly clenched his fists, and his eyes couldn't help but feel a little bitter. But what he didn't expect was that the next moment, the words of the mother goddess greatly shook his mind. Hey! This was the second time in his life that Luo Yue faced the pressure of the mother goddess. But unlike the first time, This time he was facing the pressure of an enemy. This also made Luo Yue clearly understand the power of the mother goddess for the first time. An irresistible pressure descended, but this was not the end. Like a conditioned reflex, the mother goddess's left hand, which was shining with moonlight, swung down towards the boy. Her murderous intent was like a cold wind blowing past. Facing such an attack, Luo Yue wasn't prepared. In the countdown, he could only use the crown source substance to raise his hands with all his strength. The majestic cold air instantly exploded and turned into a frost shield. What am I doing? Looking at the young man whose eyes were red, the mother goddess's body suddenly began to tremble violently. Then, her voice trembled as she muttered to herself. Looking at Luo Yue in front of her, the chaotic mother goddess revealed a painful expression and stepped back step by step. Her emotions became more and more unstable. Tears flowed down her red eyes as she looked at Luo Yue with eyes that seemed to be searching for something. Seeing the mother goddess like this, the black-haired young man couldn't hold back his emotions anymore. The young man said with a choked voice. He removed all his defenses and reached out to the mother goddess. Seeing the young man like this, the mother goddess's emotions gradually stabilized as if miraculously. After a moment of silence, the silver-haired woman murmured as if she had just woken up from a dream. She took a step forward and carefully reached out her hand. The distance between the two quickly shortened, but the moment their hands were about to touch, the ice-cold system prompt suddenly sounded again. Countdown ended, return activated. Chapter 571. The moment the system notification sounded, the space suddenly distorted, and an unimaginable force dragged the youth away from the illusory land. However, Luo Yue had no intention of leaving. The black-haired youth roared, trying to stop the return, but everything was irreversible. Darkness almost instantly swallowed his vision, and the mother goddess that was about to be touched became unreachable, and everything in the world was getting further and further away. Wait. Go back. Can't you see that she has remembered me? Are you kidding me, leaving like this, without even saying goodbye? In the darkness and silence, Luo Yue's body trembled slightly in silence. The concept of time seemed to have disappeared in his consciousness, and the discomfort of his body could not enter his consideration. At this time, his mind was only filled with the back of the silver-haired figure under the moonlight, and the call that seemed to still be lingering in his ears. The mother goddess said that Luo Yue's return was a miracle to her, and also the greatest happiness. However, for Luo Yue, didn't the mother goddess also fill the hole and emptiness in his heart for a long time? All kinds of unbearable emotions stirred in the youth's heart like a sharp knife, but it was all too late. Time passed minute by minute, and Luo Yue's will was constantly weakening. However, just as the youth was about to fall into a coma, a strange fluctuation of curse power suddenly came. Now that Luo Yue was in the void, it could be said that even he did not know where the crack of the world was. On the way back from this historical fragment to the modern world, there was no stop or rest area, and people from the outside world should not be able to interfere. Such a question arose in the youth's heart, and a silver-haired figure first appeared in his mind, but such a possibility was immediately rejected by him. After Luo Yue left the historical fragment, he had been falling, but this strange power suddenly appeared from below, which should be from the modern world, which did not match the direction of the mother goddess. Wait, I've seen this curse power before. It's you. The moment he thought of the answer to his question, the black-haired boy released all the curse power he could muster to defend himself. However, the resistance he could muster was extremely limited as he had yet to recover from his serious injuries. Most importantly, the purpose of this curse power was not to attack, but to guide. Amidst the intense battle of curses, a blurry image flashed across the young man's eyes. It was a scene of a man with a blurred face trying his best to interfere with Luo Yue's landing point in reality. After witnessing this scene, the black-haired young man suddenly woke up and realized that the consequences were unimaginable. For a few hours, the probability of hidden fog waiting in the same place was very small. After all, the 6 disasters that hadn't fully developed didn't have high intelligence. He didn't know about Luo Yue's bloodline ability, and it was unlikely that he would have the idea of waiting. However, if the collector arranged a landing spot for him, then everything would be different. Such a question emerged in Luo Ye's mind, and soon, the young man got the answer. However, it was the worst situation he could imagine. Inexplicably, an indescribable call echoed in the young man's ears. It was as terrifying as the whispers of an evil god, but it was also as difficult to guard against as a demon that could steal one's soul. In front of the young man's eyes, all kinds of strange colors began to roll. Human figures with deformed bodies, monsters that couldn't be described. All kinds of scenes flashed before Luo Ye's eyes, and the black-haired young man's brain began to quickly become dizzy. The idea of wanting to join in emerged in his mind, and it began to strengthen uncontrollably. It was the place where the crazy savior would be thousands of years later, and it was also the end of the horror and disaster that was far beyond imagination, the dark underground hole that devoured everything. Such a thought rose in his chaotic brain. The black-haired young man immediately mobilized his curse power to attack the source substance of the crown. However, the source of power that had saved Luo Ye countless times in the past had fallen into a deep sleep and didn't move at all. On the other hand, the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. So that's it. He was waiting for me to enter the historical fragment. Whether the winged man king or the fallen spirit race in the real world could kill him or not, it would prompt Luo Ye to find a way to resolve this crisis, and the final result would be a historical fragment. Not good. If this continues, everything was the same as before, just like the last time when the young man was illuminated by the Trent's sacrificial divine weapon. However, this time, it wasn't a soul that could leave at will that came here, but Luo Ye himself. Since the encounter was unavoidable, Luo Ye could only fight for survival in the face of death. As long as there was a slight possibility, the black-haired young man would never choose to die. Thinking about the silver-haired woman that he had just parted with, the black-haired young man's heart was filled with unwillingness. In the garden just now, the series of actions of the mother goddess had left him with too many mysteries. If he didn't figure it out, Luo Ye could die with a grievance. It was a violent wind that swept away everything. The moment it blew from the abyss, the originally restless depravity and madness all hid in fear. The squirming darkness also stopped moving. In the darkness somewhere, the collector's blurry face was still unclear, but the aura around him was extremely gloomy. An angry whisper flashed in the darkness, and in the crack of the world, Luo Ye suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the light at the end of the world. The moment he noticed the familiar light, the black-haired young man suddenly felt a majestic curse rising from the bottom to the sky. In one fell swoop, the power of the collector was offset by more than half. The bloodline's correction ability was activated again, and Luo Ye's body began to emit light again. When Luo Ye noticed the change in the landing point, an unprecedented sense of security emerged in his heart. However, before he could say anything, the next moment, an irresistible distortion suddenly struck him, and the will that the black-haired young man held on for a long time finally shattered. Due to unknown interference, the landing point has changed. Detecting the risk level of the surrounding environment. Initiating emergency plan, initiating bloodline promotion. Promotion initiating, please find a safe place. When the black-haired youth's consciousness once again surfaced from the darkness, the first thing he heard was the system's noisy voice. Then, he felt the cold and damp ground and a faint light. Then, there was a sudden, almost irresistible burning sensation that rose in his body. At this time, Luo Ye's condition was too bad, and even moving was slightly difficult. In addition, the real damage to Luo Ye was the previous danger in the crack of the world. Although the collector's plot did not succeed due to the obstruction of the unknown power, but at the last moment, when the bloodline returned to normal and urgently adjusted the landing point, Luo Ye suffered considerable damage. Lying on the ground and thinking for a while, the black-haired young man opened his eyes with difficulty. The first thing he checked was his clothes and equipment. Slowly lowering his head, Luo Ye looked down and saw that his clothes did not change from when he entered the historical fragment. He breathed a sigh of relief. He reached out and grasped the short sword at his waist, feeling a little relieved. Then, he began to shift his gaze to observe the surroundings. There were no traces of human activity. After scanning the surroundings for the second time, Luo Yue aimed at a hollow tree at the edge of the forest. It had been dead for an unknown number of years. Clenching his arm, he slowly injected the remaining curse power into the short sword. The black-haired young man issued the command to activate the skill with a hoarse voice. In a soft whisper, Luo Yue's body disappeared into thin air. The next time he appeared, he was already 100 meters away. After 3 consecutive jumps, the black-haired young man successfully landed in the tree hole. When he landed, the flying dust made Luo Yue cough twice. The nearby creatures felt the young man's aura and began to quickly retreat. The black-haired young man sat up and leaned against the inner wall of the tree hole. He grabbed the staff that he always carried with him. Under the slow injection of the curse power, the 9-headed snakes began to appear at the bottom of the staff. They crawled out of the tree hole and slithered along the trunk. They raised their heads and observed the surroundings. The fierce aura of the ancient demonic beasts immediately frightened the creatures that had ill intentions towards the young man in the tree hole. After leaving the historical fragment, he was all alone. He did not even know where he was. This was the first time Luo Yue had encountered such a situation. Luo Yue was currently the most troublesome enemy, the Collector. Although Luo Yue did not know how the Collector did it, he was certain that the Collector had planned this for a long time. Now, the most important question for Luo Yue was obvious. Would the Collector be able to find him? The final landing point was determined during the bloodline correction. It was not determined by the Collector. In other words, the Collector would only know his approximate location at most. After making such a judgment, Luo Yue naturally remembered the light in the abyss and the wind of curse power that saved him. Slightly clenching the staff in his hand, the black-haired young man frowned. His heart was full of confusion. The last time he faced the Tyrant priest, Luo Yue remembered that he had seen a similar scene in a hazy state. However, because his consciousness was blurred at that time, the young man did not delve into it. But this time was different. From the direction, it is in the abyss of the Savior. Is it that light? Mother, you are. The things in the historical fragment were memories that Luo Yue would subconsciously avoid after leaving because everything in it was not real. Thinking too much would only lead to sadness, especially after unknowingly giving his heart. But this time, it was a little different. The descendant of the traitor, I remember she did say that the King's Selector in that world was the hero who defeated the Savior. He was the Mother Goddess's favorite child. The stain of the traitor had long been washed away, so there could only be one person who said this sentence. At the end of the historical fragment, the Mother Goddess's memory was obviously in chaos. The Mother Goddess in the real world regarded him as an enemy, but the Mother Goddess in the historical fragment regarded him as her true love. The contradiction caused by such a sharp conflict was almost impossible to mediate. It was also the reason why the Mother Goddess was so confused. Thinking like this, Luo Yue's face became serious. He turned his head and silently looked at the gold and blue intertwined in his hand. It was the ring that was passed down from generation to generation in the Akut family. Today, thousands of years have passed. The King's Selector family members were separated. In the turmoil, even the bloodline was about to be cut off. However, this ring fell into the hands of Luo Yue several times. So many ancestors carefully protected it, so many historical fragments passed down from generation to generation. Was it really just to make up for a debt? Or was it that it was special to begin with? Hearing the sound, the black-haired young man raised his head. He put away the ring and looked outside vigilantly. He found that there was an extra fire dragon on the plain. Chapter 572. Fire, in Luo Yue's previous world, could be said to be the beginning of human civilization, and in the Shi Yue world, fire was something that all intelligent creatures in this world in ancient times revered. Its history was even before the arrival of Shi Yue. When he saw the fire, the black-haired boy in the tree hole at the edge of the forest slightly widened his eyes, and his heart was uncontrollably excited for a moment. Because the fire represented humans, although not necessarily Luo Yue's companions, but it meant that Luo Yue was not far from the human world. The Shi-Ya world was very big, and humans had not fully explored it until now. If he really fell to a very far place, with Luo-Ya's speed, it would take him several years or even more than 10 years to travel. This was almost unacceptable for the black-haired boy, and at the same time, it was also very dangerous. Wait, that's not right. The attack in the Akit territory happened after the New Year, no doubt it was late winter. Before entering the historical fragment, whether it was the Akit territory where Luo-Ya was in or the original landing point of the historical fragment, it was cold and dry, and even snowy, but now the black-haired boy was surrounded by lush plants. The difference in climate was not a problem, but with the long line of torches that appeared in front of him now, it was a problem, because whether it was the many small countries in the south of Rose or the several virgin forests of the Austin Empire, in theory, there should not be such a team. The small countries in the south of Rose were completely incomparable to the several large countries in terms of population and national area. The whole country's army might not even be 10,000 people, and they were scattered, so it was almost impossible to make such a scene. But if it was the Austin Empire, it was a bit strange. In the background of the human world fighting against the aliens, the internal labor shortage, and the background of no one farming, a team of more than 10,000 people going to the no man's land to do? As the long line of torches entered the sight of Luo-Ya, the black-haired boy's face suddenly changed. He widened his eyes and looked into the distance in disbelief, and the reason for his surprise was very simple, because what Luo-Ya saw at this time was not human. This is the Tucker Plains. The Tucker Plains could be said to be the most dangerous place Luo-Ya knew, except for the abyss where the Savior lived. And the aliens, to Luo-Ya, as a human, they were the natural enemies. Such a thought appeared in the boy's mind, and in the next moment, Luo-Ya acted. Existence weakening, body half invisibility, color confusion, one after another, the young boy's hands released light, either covering the tree or himself. After a few seconds, whether it was the presence of Luo-Ya or the dead ancient tree was greatly weakened, hiding the existence of the forest like weeds on the roadside of the road, hidden in the forest. In the end, in the first place, Luo-Ya's, in terms of detection, the detection might not be better than the aliens' detection. But his was a detection ability be compared to the aliens'. In such a situation, Luo-Ya couldn't help but recall the silver-haired figure in his mind. But shortly after, the young boy forced himself to shake his head and suppress the thoughts in his heart. He lifted his head and continued to look into the distance. The young boy continued to observe with doubts. As time passed, the long line of torches and Luo-Ya got closer and closer. Between the light and shadows, some details of the enemy gradually appeared in the young boy's eyes. The material of the flag wasn't good, and Luo-Ya couldn't understand the pattern. But the moment the black-haired young boy saw this item, his heart trembled and his golden pupils shrunk abruptly. And the reason was simple. Because in the alien team, not everyone could have a flag. Such a thought flashed across the young boy's mind. As the team got closer, more and more evidence entered the young boy's eyes. It was a standard human weapon that was completely different from the simple weapons of the aliens, as well as some food that they had snatched. However, unlike the food that normal people imagined, it wasn't any kind of grain, but some pieces of mangled meat. Gazing at the man's arm that was held upside down by the alien's wrist, Luo-Ya's golden pupils widened. He felt the blood in his body surging as he stared at the man's arm. After witnessing this scene, Luo-Ya clearly understood one thing. That was, the aliens were definitely an enemy that humans couldn't coexist with and had to eliminate. After a moment of gazing, the black-haired young boy lowered his eyes. In order to avoid being exposed, the young boy looked at the ground and clenched his fists. As a hot-blooded warrior, Luo-Ya naturally wanted to rush out and slaughter these monsters. But if he carried out his plan, the result was that Luo-Ya would most likely become the enemy's food. In such a large tribe, there must be aliens that had reached the level of Source Level 2. In the case of the same level, the aliens had a great advantage over humans. Therefore, even the king of the human race didn't dare to rashly enter the enemy's territory. The hissing, beast-like roars, and heavy footsteps gradually became louder and louder. Not long after, it reached its peak and began to fade away. When Luoya looked up again, the plains under the moonlight had returned to its tranquility. Judging from the aliens' equipment and the bodies of the dead soldiers, this team should have fought with humans not long ago and likely won. However, after winning, they didn't go to the human world in the west, nor did they return to the east where most of the aliens were. Instead, they went south. This was too strange. So the question was, what in this forest could attract them? Looking at the silver moon in the sky, the black-haired young boy pondered over this question. Because after eliminating all the options, there seemed to be only one answer to this question. The belief of the aliens was still unknown to humans, but according to their inextricable connection with the Savior, the aliens were likely to be one of the races that followed the Savior in ancient times. And the team just now was likely to be the Collector, colluding with the higher-ups of the aliens to find him. Thinking about the tens of thousands of aliens coming to this land and even forming a net, Luoya's face couldn't help but turn ugly. After thinking for a moment, the black-haired young boy sat back on the ground and closed his eyes. Such a thought appeared in the young boy's mind. The next moment, in the silent forest, a little bit of curse power began to pulse. At the edge of the Tucker Plains, the black-haired young boy was urgently upgrading his bloodline. And in the depths of the unknown darkness, a man with a blurred face sat alone in the darkness in silence. To the Collector, this failure was no doubt frustrating. The series of plans that he prepared before were useless, but it wasn't that there was no other way. Then, the next thing to do was simple. Under the illumination of the moonlight, a pressure from the silver moon hanging in the sky suddenly enveloped him. It was a vast and majestic power that almost made people unable to resist. At the moment of its arrival, the silver moonlight seemed to be endowed with endless power, and the darkness of the night was like an unbreakable cage that could not be broken. When he was stared at by that gaze, the silver moon in the sky seemed to be infinitely magnified behind him. All the colors and sounds in the world seemed to be far away. Even without any communication, the Collector could feel the emotions contained in that gaze. Not long after, the heavy gaze inexplicably disappeared as if it had never appeared. The man with a blurred face had no choice but to retreat into the darkness because he knew what happened to him. This was a fortuitous encounter that almost no one in the world could encounter. At the same time, it could also be a sign of danger. But now, the Collector didn't have the heart to distinguish what kind of situation would befall him. He was concerned about another matter. The figure of the young boy appeared in his mind. The Collector, whose aura was gloomy to the extreme, muttered to himself. He instinctively felt that this incident was related to Luoya. However, he had no clue as to what the relationship was. After all, the Ackett family's bloodline couldn't interfere with reality. This was an iron law that was obtained after countless observations. No matter what, after this incident, it was impossible for the man with a blurred face to personally deal with Luoya. But for this situation, the Collector didn't have any worries or regrets. And the reason was very simple. You probably want to hide, but unfortunately, it's useless. From the moment you set foot on that land, your ending has already been decided. Looking at the map in front of him, the man with a blurred face said so. His body slowly disappeared into the depths of the darkness. Chapter 573. Ding. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on the forest adjacent to the plains, and the red light brought a little warmth to the world with its final reluctance. In the tree hole that was entangled with poisonous snakes, the black-haired boy, who had woken up from his deep sleep due to the system's prompt, quietly opened his eyes. Luoya, who had just woken up, stared at the sunset through the gaps of the leaves for a moment. He gradually regained consciousness. He felt his body and found that the heat that almost melted him had disappeared and was replaced by a cool coolness. At this time, there were fewer weeds in the distance. On the ground that could barely be considered a road, there were some skeletons and fragments of armor left behind. It was obvious that the human soldiers would not come here. These were the remains of the mutants who had died in battle and were used as food by the mutants. Staring at the debris on the roadside, the black-haired youth frowned deeply. After the first batch of mutants, Luo saw with his own eyes that there were 2 batches of reinforcements totaling more than 10,000 people. In addition to the ones that passed by when he was asleep, the entire southern forest of the Tucker Plains could be said to be filled with tens of thousands of mutants. Collector would not let him fall into such a dangerous place and return safely. If he did not move quickly, it was almost certain that he would be found by the believers of the Savior. In addition, the encirclement of the mutants should also be forming, and the evidence was the eagle-like monsters soaring in the sky in the distance. Other than forming an encirclement, Luo could not think of any other reason for these beasts to stand guard. What he had to do now was to quickly leave before the encirclement was formed. After the bloodline upgrade, Luo's reward finally appeared. But what Luo did not expect was that the reward this time was far more generous than he imagined. Received Crown Stone, you have received a skill, generating skill details. Looking at the sudden reward that appeared in the system, the black-haired youth's expression was exceptionally excited. The Crown Stone of the 6 Disasters could be said to be the most direct thing to increase Luo's battle strength. It was also a power that was difficult for anyone to defend against. But what he didn't expect was that this time, the historical fragment actually gave him 2 abilities of the Crown Stone. After some analysis, Luo more or less figured out the reason. The only thing that the young man lacked was the Light of Devouring Crown Stone. Because he defeated the Savior together with Luo, he didn't meet the death condition to obtain the Crown Stone. However, Luo didn't mind it. After all, the Crown Stone was Luo's last soul. Molten Core, side effect, high fever, a skill from one of the primordial calamities. It is the manifestation of the power of space that devours all things and erases their existence. Any living being within the silver mist will be stripped of their existence. The degree of destruction will change according to the changes of the curse power and time. All in all, the effects of the 2 skills didn't exceed Luo's expectations. They were both weakened versions of the 6 Disasters. Among them, the mechanism of the Devouring Silver Mist was somewhat similar to Luo's other skill, Corrosive Time Breath. Their effects were gradually stacked according to practical experience. But what he didn't expect was that the side effects of both skills were so similar. For the sake of insurance, let me ask. The side effects of the Devouring Silver Mist are, there's an ancient saying, heaven moves vigorously, a gentleman should, you're singing? Ding, the side effects of the skill are unknown. Please consider it yourself. Are you fucking Indian? The system's detection might fail in the face of skills related to time and space. Luo already knew this. Besides, even though the system would occasionally screw up, it was still quite reliable most of the time and had indeed helped Luo a lot. In the situation where the side effects were uncertain, Luo, who suffered a great loss from the corrosive time breath, didn't want to eat crabs anymore. On the other hand, the black-haired young man's current physical condition didn't allow him to do so. He definitely couldn't use it in a short period of time. At least, he had to get out of danger first. But although Luo had entered the sealed sequence, he still couldn't hide his joy about obtaining this crown stone. Because after obtaining this crown stone, the threat of the concealing mist that the black-haired young man didn't know how to deal with was greatly reduced. With this thought in mind, Luo slowly raised his head and looked at the silver moon in the sky silently with a complicated gaze. After a long time, he once again paid attention to his condition. He found that the fusion of the source substance of the crown was still ongoing, and the channel of the ancient gods didn't improve either. Luo murmured to himself while pressing on his glabella. However, halfway through his sentence, his body suddenly stiffened. After that, he abruptly raised his head and looked outside the tree hole. Tonight, the southern part of the Tucker Plains wasn't cloudy and rainy. On the contrary, it wasn't dark at all. Under such weather, the monsters in the forest were abnormally active. Hunting, killing, and bloodshed became the main theme of the night. It was a sudden silence that came without warning. The moment it appeared, the world was like a gorgeous and lifelike background painting. Almost all sound disappeared. In an instant, only the sound of the wind was left between heaven and earth. All the creatures in the entire forest area fell into silence. In the tree hole, the black-haired young man also widened his eyes as he felt an unbearable heavy pressure. Such a situation gave the young man a strong ominous premonition. He began to quickly think about the source of this aura. No, it's even higher than that. Wait, could this be the Tucker Plains? There was indeed an individual who was out of the norm and was regarded as the ultimate threat by humans. The moment he thought of this name, the sense of crisis in Luo Ye's heart suddenly exploded. He immediately realized the seriousness of the problem. Just like the current human race only had the king of the race but not the king of the human race, in the past several wars with the mutants never had such a king. But this time, the situation seemed to have changed. And this also represented the arrival of an irresistible disaster. It was a mysterious black sphere that appeared out of nowhere. There seemed to be endless black smoke rolling within it. When it appeared, countless mutants in the forest roared and knelt down to worship it. The next moment, an intense black light suddenly flashed from within, covering the entire area and illuminating the entire area. The intense pain made Luo Ye's face turn pale. But at this time, he didn't care about that. The moment such a thought appeared in his mind, the flashing black light suddenly converged. The invisible heavy pressure also converged into a bundle. In the tree hole, the black-haired young man's body burst out under the heavy pressure. The indestructible body skill was automatically activated. Nine-headed snake staff. Under Roha's unreservedly infusion, the ancient berserk beast regained its former glory, and what followed was a mythical scene. Amidst the explosion of trees, 9 gigantic snake heads soared into the sky from the edge of the forest. They snarled madly as though they were about to devour their enemies. Facing such a situation, the flickering black sphere erupted abruptly, releasing a destructive radiance. At the edge of the forest, the black-haired young man endured the pain in his soul and urged all his curse power. Under the violent impact, the sturdy scales of the 9-headed snake were shattered, its flesh exploded, and its bones turned into dust. However, under the effect of the enhanced regeneration skill, new snake heads constantly appeared in front of the young man. In the seesaw battle, Luo Ye's remaining curse power was quickly exhausted. The black sphere in the sky also rapidly shrank under the attack. The next moment, a violent explosion occurred. The young man's vision instantly turned into a white light. Chapter 574. At the edge of the Tucker Plains, thick smoke and dust covered the sky. Billowing flames illuminated the sky. Amidst the crackling sounds of burning trees, countless creatures in the forest fled frantically, desperately running towards the depths of the forest. The hazy consciousness brought with it a sense of unreality. The feeling of powerlessness spreading throughout the body made people want to close their eyes and sleep. In the billowing smoke and dust, Luo Ye, who had just woken up, blinked his eyes and lost the sense of his body for a moment. The sudden explosion almost instantly destroyed the 5 snake heads that still existed at that time. The violent shock wave rushed to the ground with a rain of blood, almost crushing everything below into meat paste. Fortunately, at the critical moment, the self-protection mechanism of the Hydra staff was activated. A greenish-black light erupted from the staff, forming a snake scale-like barrier. Slightly tilting his head to look at the shattered and burning trees and mounds of earth, the black-haired teenager's expression was as dignified as water. Yes, this was the result of the remaining half of the attack, and from this, he could roughly speculate the overall picture of the attack. Just now, the pressure that made everything in the world silent, as if the master of heaven and earth had returned, its real strength was definitely not what the previous attack showed. If Luo Ye didn't guess wrong, that black sphere was probably just one of the many detection spells released by the enemy in order to find the whereabouts of Luo Ye. Woo! Although the black sphere had exhausted its spell power in the confrontation with Luo Ye, the black-haired teenager had also exposed his position. The aftermath of the battle between the two was extremely wide, and tens of thousands of aliens in the forest also found the direction of Luo Ye in the explosion. Through the scattered smoke and dust, the black-haired teenager who sensed the number of enemies had an extremely dignified expression. After experiencing the previous encounter, Luo Yue had basically lost the ability to fight with the alien army. Now the enemy seemed weak, but in fact, the danger level in Luo Yue's eyes was higher than the previous black sphere. In a short moment, thousands of arrows rose into the air and turned into a murderous dark cloud that blasted towards Luo Yue's location. On the other side, the black-haired teenager endured the severe pain in his body and held the staff beside him. In the hoarse call, the giant snake shadow once again appeared in the thick smoke. It opened its mouth and let out a frightening roar, and used its body to shield Luo Yue, who fell to the ground. Dense striking sounds came like rain, and continuous explosions fell on the giant snake's body. But unlike before, although it also let out a roar, the Hydra wasn't seriously injured this time. Instead, it was enraged and launched a counterattack. Amidst the earth-shattering roar, the giant snake shadow flashed rapidly in the smoke and dust. The Poison Beast King ability crazily produced a lethal poison that could kill even a drop. Then, the Hydra's mouth spewed out the lethal poison in a frenzy. The first to charge into the smoke was the alien cavalry. It wasn't a unified army, but instead, it was a group of stragglers that came from all over the forest closest to Luo Yue. Unfortunately, these monsters that arrived first didn't see the dying enemy, but the lethal poison hidden in the smoke and dust. The moment they rushed into the poisonous fog, the dozens of mounts and their masters let out earth-shattering screams at the same time. Under the poison of the Hydra, their bodies instantly festered. The pain that reached the limit of their nerves made them scream crazily, and then turned into a pool of blood in just a few seconds. To the ordinary mutants, the orders of the Race King could not be disobeyed, and the orders of beings above them must be obeyed. The moment the Black Sphere launched its attack, everyone's actions were predetermined and would not be changed by any factors. At this point, the battle had entered its second phase. In the forest ruins, hundreds and thousands of aliens began to wander around the periphery of the poisonous fog. They surrounded the area while launching long-range attacks. Facing such a situation, the Hydra suddenly charged out of the fog after a long silence. Its 9 bloody mouths swept across and reaped the lives of the aliens. Severed limbs were everywhere, and blood rained down like rain. Under the power of Luo Yue's curse, the Hydra, as the king of the ancient demonic beasts, looked down on everything. However, in the center of the smoke, the black-haired young man's face didn't reveal the relief of defeating the enemy. Instead, it revealed an unprecedented anxiety. The black-haired young man's face turned pale. After the battle with the Black Sphere, Luo Yue's position had been exposed. The enemy must be on their way here. Before that, they had to distance themselves as much as possible. This was the only way for Luo Yue to survive. Chapter 575. In the southern part of the Tucker Plains, an intense light flashed across the sky. In an instant, the entire region was illuminated as though it was daytime. Then, it quickly extinguished, like a bright light that was accidentally lit and quickly turned off, or like the traces left behind by a meteor across the night sky. Boom! The mutants who were protecting the priests raised their shields and shouted loudly, trying their best to resist the aftermath of the spell's failure. In the forest, the light spear swept away everything like the brush of a god. Wait, Nuo Arya, when did she become so strong? But this seemingly unbreakable spell was easily defeated by the golden-haired angel. This situation could be said to be a pleasant surprise for Luo Yue. However, after lifting his head, the black-haired young man couldn't be happy because he discovered that after the initial surprise, the young lady's emotions had once again undergone a drastic change. No matter if it was the difficulties in the historical fragment or the thrill of facing the Angel King, Nuo Arya had never shed a tear. To the young lady who had been extremely strict with herself since young, tears weren't something that a ruler should have. It was also a sign of weakness. If all of this is real, Nuo Arya, don't worry, it's me, Luo Yue Akut. Hearing Luo Yue's words, Nuo Arya sobbed even harder. The black-haired young man smiled gently. He caressed the young lady's cheeks and reached out his hand to wipe away the tears on her face. The young man revealed a pitiful expression. Hearing his words, Nuo Arya nodded, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. It's been a year, You're finally back. Before this, although Luo Ya guessed that the time he spent in the historical fragment would be much longer than before, he didn't expect it to be this long. Thinking of this, the black-haired young man was speechless. For a moment, he didn't know where to start explaining to Nuo Arya. On the other side, Nuo Arya, who was holding the chain in her hand, sobbed with reddened eyes. In the end, the golden-haired young lady couldn't help but cover her mouth and sob. Her sorrowful look made Luo Ya's heart ache. However, before the black-haired young man said anything, a powerful aura suddenly came from the enemy's formation. At the same time, the remaining mutants in the forest began to gather again. Sensing the strength of the enemy, Luo Ya, who was exhausted due to various reasons, suddenly frowned. He wanted to remind Nuo Arya, but he realized that the Nuo Arya was staring at Luo Ya's body at this moment. Chapter 576. Inside the cave, the blonde girl looked at Luo Ya in front of her. Finally, she showed a determined expression. After hearing Nuo Arya's words, the black-haired boy couldn't help but look serious. Let's not mention that when Luo Ya left, Akut territory was under attack. The war between the mutants and the humans made Luo Ya particularly concerned. After all, Luo Ya's father, Ka, was at the front line at that time, and the humans had already formulated an attack plan in spring. But now, seeing the princess's expression, Luo Ya had a bad premonition in his heart. As if to confirm this point, Nuo Arya also said the truth. Worry and fear began to grow in his heart. For a moment, Luo Ya didn't know how to react. As if she expected the boy's emotional change, the blonde girl showed a distressed expression. She held Luo Ya's cheeks with both hands and said softly, "Seriously injured? Then what's the matter with the king of the race? In the year after you left, it seems that under the influence of the resurrection of the Savior, the mutant's strength began to increase like never before. The most obvious point is that the number of long-range priests began to increase." Thinking of the burning clouds above the mutant's army last night, the black-haired boy couldn't help but reveal a look of understanding. Nuo Arya nodded in affirmation. "Nuo Arya?" The princess lowered her head and closed her eyes. She said so to suppress the surging emotions in her heart. Then, she raised her head and said again. The two sides of Nuo Arya, this was something Luo Ya knew since childhood. The princess must be dignified in front of others and must not be weak in front of the enemy. However, in the face of so many deaths and injuries of loved ones, how could she be indifferent? The boy hugged Nuo Arya, hoping that she could vent more, but unfortunately, the princess didn't stay long. After crying a few times, the girl raised her head, as if there was something she needed to tell Luo Ya. She continued to speak with a hoarse voice. Nuo Arya? Ari Lisi is missing." The moment he heard this news, the black-haired boy's face froze. His body stiffened, like an old man with bad hearing. He paused for a moment. He blinked as if he couldn't understand this sentence. Until Nuo Arya turned her face away with a pained expression, Luo Ya slightly recovered. Luo Ya. Chapter 577. A letter to Miss. From the master's side. I understand. Thank you for your hard work. Please have a good rest. With her back facing the soldiers who were arranged to rest by the guards, the black-haired maid sighed silently. She felt a headache because of what had happened in the past 6 months. It was at that time that the patriarch of the Sorofia family, Bruce, made a shocking decision. That was to transfer Xia Luote, who was handling domestic affairs in the rear, to the front line as a general of the joint army and directly participate in the battle. This could also be said to be the beginning of everything. Bruce forced Xia Luote to join the army. This seemed to be to take the lead, but in fact, he had to do so for other reasons. G.E. Lacey, who spent every day with Xia Luote, knew this very well. "It's Miss G.E. Lacey, open the gate." No. Last time on the battlefield, it was all thanks to you stopping her. Otherwise, young mistress. Yes, I misspoke, please don't mind. The black-haired maid and the young lady of the Sorofia family were the two commanders in this Richard Castle. They were also 2 masters of Source Level 2 who were officially awarded the title of General by the Joint Army. However, it had to be said that the 2 gave off completely different feelings. At this time, Miss should have woken up. Sir G. Lacey, Miss Shia Luote is not here. After nodding with some frustration, the maid turned around and continued to walk into the castle. G. E. Lacey quickly walked to the room where Shia Luote was and waved his hand to signal the maid at the door to leave. He reached out and gently pushed the door open, but just as he opened a gap, a strong smell of alcohol rushed out of the room. On the ground, several bottles of different colors were casually thrown on the carpet. Even the lids were not tightly closed. Looking at the famous wine thrown on the ground, the black-haired maid showed a melancholy look on her face. However, after a moment of hesitation, she closed the door again and stood at the door sighing silently. Love destroys people. This was what many ancient poets once said, and for the current Shia Luote Sorophia, this sentence was perfect. However, no one would have thought that the young girl who grew up because of love would eventually collapse because of love. As a fiancée, she did not help her lover. This fact made Shia Luote feel very guilty. However, the young girl could only endure the worry and wait for Luo Ye's return. But with the passage of time and the news from the knight's country, the young girl's situation began to change. After discovering this, Bruce immediately ordered for Charlotte to receive treatment. However, the young lady was deeply in love, and any psychological counseling was ineffective. Even Master Andrew couldn't eliminate the grief in the young lady's heart. Chapter 578. Luo Ye Akut could be said to be an old diner. As a foodie, he traveled all over the world and tasted a lot of delicacies. Among them, he cared about the ingredients the most. Good ingredients could double the taste, but the young man probably never thought that he would be treated as an ingredient one day. That, Nuo Arya, how does it taste? Looking at the soup in front of her that was made with the unique dried demon meat of the mutants and many wild vegetables, and slightly seasoned with salt, the blonde girl blinked in surprise and couldn't help but praise. No matter what, I'm still from a military family. I still have some survival skills in the wild. Didn't I make it for you before? Hey! This. Hearing the question of Nuo Arya, the black-haired young man's eyes wandered for a moment, but after thinking carefully for a while, he became confident again. 1 second, remember. Really? Is that so? But twice. We are really fated with this land. 2 years ago, it was also on this land that the girl who couldn't control her bloodline was about to be devoured by the Angel King, but she was saved by the young man alone. At that time, the 2 of them probably didn't think that one day they would actually return to this old place. Recalling the past, the black-haired young man smiled bitterly while poking the bonfire, and Nuo Arya fell into silence. After a while, he said in a low voice, What are you talking about? That's because of the skill, there's no right or wrong. By the way, actually, I have one thing that I have always wanted to ask you. At that time, the Tucker Plains had the elusive fog of concealment, and there was also the threat of the mutants. Weren't you afraid when you came to me? Blinking and lowering his head to poke the bonfire, the black-haired young man recalled his thoughts at that time and said faintly, impulsive? In other words, you will give up after calming down? You mean? Just based on this reason, it's too reckless. No matter what, you have to plan and gather the team. Chapter 579. Under the illumination of the setting sun, the black-haired young man held onto a slightly withered tree as he looked at the desert in front of him. Looking into the distance in the night wind, he could see the vast land. The primitive natural landscape gave Luo Ye a strange feeling that he had never felt before, as if he was the only one left in the world. In the end, crossing the border with more people was more dangerous. Unless there were so many refugees that a country's wall couldn't stop them, the fewer people there were, the easier it was to move and the harder it was to be discovered. Since a few days ago, Luo Ye had been conserving his energy. The king's blood that had been promoted to the gold grade was constantly restoring Luo Ye's condition. The crown's fusion with the source substance had reached the final stage. Although the connection with the ancient gods had not been completely established, the use of the crown stone was no longer a problem. Under the afterglow of the setting sun, the young man muttered softly as he looked at the freezing air around his arm that froze the nearby leaves. He nodded silently and felt a lot more at ease in his heart. With this kind of strength, although it was impossible to compete with the king of the race, it wasn't difficult to cross the desert. On the other hand, after the projection disappeared, Nuo Arya, who had returned to the human side, had probably announced the young man's plan. The relevant rescue operation would also be launched. Thinking so, the young man hesitated at the edge of the desert. After a moment, he decided to temporarily rest for the night. After all, compared to the current environment, the desert's conditions at night were more unbearable. Remember in a second. Yesterday morning, after the short blade skill of the saint was dispelled, the golden-haired angel's consciousness immediately returned to her body. When she opened her eyes, she saw layers of enchantments and the priests protecting her in the center. Grandpa, Luo Ya is in the depths of the Tark Plains. I beg you to immediately. Through the projection, Saint John comforted the girl who was worried about Luo Ya and asked for detailed information about the young man. Correspondingly, Nuo Arya also learned about the Vatican's plan and Saint John's decision. The existence of the mutants' king made everyone fearful, which was also the reason why the humans were in a disadvantageous position on the battlefield. However, after weighing the pros and cons of rescuing Luo Ya, Holy See John decided to carry it out. The reason was simple. In Holy See John's opinion, the humans couldn't afford to lose the possessor of the king's blood. If the king of the mutants really awakened and led his army to attack the humans again, then the humans who were at a disadvantage in terms of combat power would definitely be at a disadvantage and might even face the extinction of their race. Since quality wasn't good enough, they would make up for it with quantity. This was the best method that the humans could come up with. Under this guidance, Nuo Arya of the Saint Maester Theocracy, Xia Luote of the Rose Commercial United Nations, Lillian of the Austin Empire, and many other rising stars of the Golden Generation became the focus of the humans. The mutants were waiting for the absolute king of their race to awaken, while the humans were accumulating strength. This was why the war between both sides was much calmer than it was a year ago. However, Luo Ya's reappearance changed Holy See John's mind. Although no one knew about it now, as the only person who awakened the king's blood, Luo Ya was known as the special existence of the king's blood in ancient records. She was the supervisor of all races in ancient times and was also one of the embodiments of Shi Ya's authority and strength. The moment her strength reached level 1 of the source level, no other race could be compared to her. On the other hand, even if the Holy See had to bear the responsibility of the entire human race, Holy See John couldn't abandon the only descendant of his family for hundreds of years as a king. And as an elder, he couldn't personally ruin his granddaughter's lifelong happiness. In order to get support for the joint operation, Holy See John had sent letters to the chairman of the Scholar Country, Antonio, the president of the Rose Commercial United Nations, Bruce, and the king of the Night Country, Friedrich. A large-scale, multinational rescue operation was about to begin. However, the Austin Empire was excluded, and the reason was simple. In response to Nuo Arya's inquiry, Holy See John gave such an answer with a solemn expression. The young lady also expressed her confidence. However, Nuo Arya didn't expect that a letter from Xia Luote would complicate everything. Chapter 580. The moment the crimson flames appeared, a ray of light flashed across the sky. The compressed lava turned into a spear of light that burned everything and shot towards the darkness in the distance. The enemy's strength was beyond imagination. Not only that, but they also had a level 1 source rank ally and the mutants' army all over the land. The black-haired young man was facing the entire mutant race alone. This was undoubtedly a fantasy. Under such circumstances, the only thing Luo Ya could do was to kill the leader. Molten Core. This was a new ability that Luo Ya obtained in this historical fragment. It was the manifestation of Mr. Darkness, a calamity that represented volcanoes and Earth. Even though Luo Ya had only obtained it for a short period of time, there was one thing that the black-haired young man was certain of, and that was the power of this ability. At this moment, the lava that could destroy everything was the best choice. Most importantly, it belonged to the power of 6 calamities. It was a part of Shi Ya's power in ancient times, and it was also an unstoppable punishment. Boom! The arm of the gigantic mutant writhed in the smoke formed by volcanic ash, appearing and disappearing from time to time. In the distance, the black-haired young man panted slightly as he observed the movements in the smoke. His golden eyes were filled with vigilance. The king of mutants. That was an existence above the king of races. Its strength was unpredictable. Not only Luo Ya, but even the entire human race knew nothing about it. Because of this, Luo Ya's first priority was to gather basic information. In the smoke, the giant mutant's arm constantly waved, stirring up gusts of wind. Under this kind of movement, the smoke gradually dispersed, and Luo Ya finally had the chance to see the state of the mutants on the horizon. But what he didn't expect was that the result was completely unacceptable. Looking at the tall and strong male mutant standing on the shoulder of the giant mutant and looking down at them, the black-haired young man's golden pupils suddenly contracted. The sense of danger in his heart rose rapidly. The power of the 6 disasters was almost impossible to defend against. Whether it was curse resistance or reincarnation, even if the body was made of liquid, it should be impossible to avoid being burned. The proof was that at this moment, the king of the Source Rank 1 race, who was known for its invulnerability and almost absolute defense, had half of the scales on the front of its body burned, and it was roaring like crazy. The deafening roar spread in the desert. The black-haired young man stared at the enemy in the distance with a heavy expression. However, contrary to his thoughts, the curse power in Luo Ya's body flowed faster and faster, and the crown stone in his body also changed accordingly, blooming different colors. Frozen earth. The drifting volcanic smoke dissipated in an instant. The burning flames also disappeared silently. The gigantic mutant's mangled body stiffened in an instant. The seemingly fearless mutant king's body was also buried in the overwhelming frost. Luo Ya thought so and waited nervously for the movement in front of him. However, everything that happened next was far beyond the young man's expectations, and it even reached a level that Luo Ya couldn't understand. The overwhelming cold, the gradually solidifying lava, the floating smoke, and the splashing sand. In an instant, everything from the other side of the horizon to Luo Ya disappeared without a trace. Only the yellow sand was left floating in the air. The black-haired young man's serious expression turned into shock, and his mind went blank. Such a question appeared in Luo Ya's mind at this moment, but it was too late to find the answer. On the other side, the king of races on the giant monster's arm had once again stretched out its hand, and this time its target was the black-haired young man. At this moment, Luo Ya's brain was spinning rapidly. Under a strong sense of crisis, his survival instinct made him subconsciously choose the strongest defense. His thin and weak body instantly burst out countless wind mist, protecting himself. The sweeping wind mist blew across the desert, and the ultra-long-distance twilight wind formed an absolute defense. At this moment, Luo Ya was almost fearless, but the habit of controlling the young man's body subconsciously made a dodging action. But what Luo Ya never thought was that this dodging action would save his life. When his body landed on the ground again, Luo Ya couldn't even stand still. While retreating step by step, the young man with blood flowing from the corner of his mouth was stunned for a moment, and finally understood what happened in that short moment. Staring at the enemy in the distant wind mist, Luo Ya's vision blurred. In that indescribable still world, the enemy dug out a part of his body. This was a fact, but Luo Ya found it hard to accept. From the outside, there didn't seem to be any problem, but from the inside, the black-haired young man was severely injured. Nearly half of his heart was gone, and the black-haired young man almost lost consciousness. Under such damage, the indestructible body skill was immediately activated, and Luo Ya's body began to overheat and overload, entering an unimaginable recovery stage. Violent coughs accompanied the awakening of his body. Under the surge of the curse power, the damaged heart rapidly shrank and began to form a new structure under the operation of the curse power, temporarily supporting the young man's body. On the other side, the rapidly increasing blood supply made Luo Ya's brain instantly awake. That attack, it's not a curse. As long as it was a curse attack, no matter what kind of attack it was, it would be affected by the twilight wind. Especially for such a long-distance attack with such terrifying lethality, it was almost impossible to activate it under the interference of time. If it wasn't a curse, then there was only one possibility that could accurately injure Luo Yue under such conditions. After realizing this, Luo Yue's sense of crisis increased sharply. He immediately decided to retreat, but in the midst of his rapid retreat, the young man looked at the mutant king in the distance. He didn't know when the monster had raised its hand again, but the flow of time also slowed down. At this moment, Luo Yue's golden pupils suddenly shrank. He felt as if a cold wind blew past his neck. The threat of death made the young man's back shiver. However, the countless experiences of surviving in the face of death made him instantly explode. Sensing that the enemy's attack was about to descend, the young man sped up and chanted the name of the skill. Under extreme anger, he launched a counterattack. In the midst of a roar, Luo Yue's body burned up. A large amount of volcanic ash and lava exploded around him like a huge flower. The smoke of the petals shrouded his body, and the flame in the center of the flower suddenly burst out after a flash. In the midst of the deafening sound, the impact of the lava was like a giant's fist. It climbed up to the sky and then swung down on the two mutants. The huge pressure was far greater than Luo Yue's first attack. In the face of the power from 6 disasters, the mutant king was also moved for the first time. It had to change its target. Bang! All attacks were planned. This was the principle that Luo Yue had always followed, and the current situation was the same. With the counterattack of the mutant king, the lava fire had completely exploded. Thick volcanic ash drifted everywhere, and Luo Yue's figure was also covered. The barrier of the twilight wind made the opponent unable to catch up for a short period of time. Such a thought appeared in the young man's mind. The quickly retreating Luo Yue accelerated again. He clenched his fists and tried to keep himself awake, but his face didn't look relaxed. Because of the scenes of the previous battle, the black-haired young man had a lot of dissonance in his heart. The mutants pay attention to martial ethics. Don't bully with numbers. This is obviously impossible. Wait. Motionless. This is. One of them was a mutant with a neck twice as long as the average mutant, a pair of huge wings on his back, and grey skin. 2 source-level ones, the kings of the mutants race. The mutant king. It wasn't because it underestimated Luo Yue that it let him go so easily, but because it knew from the beginning that Luo Yue couldn't escape at all. Because the previous battle, to a certain extent, was a trap. The purpose was probably to buy time for the mutants' army and the other 2 mutant kings to arrive. 3 mutant kings, tens of thousands of elites, looking at the approaching demons in the distance, the expression on Luo Yue's face slowly calmed down. His golden eyes lit up, revealing a resolute gaze. Seeing such a young man, the winged mutants roared, and the sword-wielding warriors were ready to attack. In the distant team, many soldiers clenched their weapons, and the priests raised their staffs to the sky. The tense situation was about to be triggered, and the battle that would decide life and death was about to begin. In the distant sky, a light began to flicker, and it was rapidly approaching the desert. Chapter 581. In the middle of the desert, a black-haired young man stood in the middle of the desert with his hand on his chest. Powerful enemies and war drums were beating in all directions. Under the fluttering flags, the mutated people were making strange cries, and the chanting of the priests was all over the place. 3 source-level First Kings. Such a lineup was rare, and the humans had never seen such a lineup in the past. This was because the kings of different tribes were likely to be enemies with each other, and working together to defeat the enemy was almost impossible. This was also the reason why the humans were able to defeat them one by one in the past. 9 deaths and 1 life. In a sense, this was an extremely optimistic statement. It was more likely that this was the place where the young man would die. Before parting ways with Nuo Arya, Luo Yue had said that they would meet again soon and that he would definitely return. However, at this moment, The young man had to admit that he might never be able to fulfill his promise. Under the distant sky, the roars of the hybrids could be heard from the opposite side of the wind mist. The roars seemed to cause the sky to change color, and under the strange ability of the hybrid's king, the twilight wind mist quickly dissipated. The huge figure approached step by step, gradually revealing itself, and with the roar of the earth, it blocked Luo Ye's last escape route. The hybrids in all directions stopped, the soldiers stopped shouting, and the priests no longer spoke. They all looked at the figure on the shoulder of the huge monster. The vast desert was silent for a moment, and only the wind and sand were still blowing. The moment the two gazes met, Luo Ye's body tensed up, and he was ready to deal with the strange attack. However, the tall and strong hybrid's king did not raise his deadly arms, nor did he immediately order an attack. Instead, he opened his mouth and spoke a strange language. In the calm voice, a wave of ancient and complex language was heard. It was a foreign language that Luo Ye had never heard of before, but the black-haired young man could understand it, because the moment the language entered his ears, the corresponding meaning would appear in his mind, and the content was very simple. King Selection. This title had long disappeared with the passage of time, and the glory of the King Selection race was no longer there. However, for an ancient existence, the person who possessed the bloodline of the overseer granted by Shi Ya would always be the most troublesome existence, and also a problem that must be solved. The young man's affirmative words came out from his mouth, and the alien king in the distance responded with silence. After a moment, he said, "I see. I didn't expect that after so many years, the one who finally remembers us is actually the enemy. Shi Ya's power is always so dazzling. You were sent here by my ally, and it's your destiny to be killed by me." Hearing the words of the hybrid's king, the black-haired young man raised his eyebrows and smiled. Looking at the ugly expression of the mutant king, the fearless young man mocked him without holding back. Madness and depravity are only the price. When he returns, everything will change. Chapter 582. In the desert, the horns of the various tribes sounded at the same time. Some of the horns were loud enough to make one's blood boil, while some were low enough to make one's impetuous. Dozens of different sounds mixed together to form a symphony of destruction. The chosen king was an existence that had to be killed even if one had to pay a terrible price. It was also the last gem that Shia had left behind in the world after countless years. His power was worth the deaths of so many warriors, and the kings of the various races had also paid the price in the previous battle. As the kings of their races, perhaps they would firmly carry out the orders of the mutant's king, but the price wouldn't be their lives. As for the enemies who were more severely injured than them, the human wave tactic was the smallest loss in their eyes. The second unfair battle began. The situation of 1 against 3 worsened, and Luo Ye's situation became more and more dangerous. Although the indestructible body skill was still active, the young man could no longer feel his own body. The twilight wind had been deactivated due to the exhaustion. The reign of the curse of death had also entered a temporary cooldown. Only the young man who was surrounded by frost and lava began to fight with the least amount of strength. In the midst of a bestial roar, the first level 2 source chosen swung his blade at Luo Ye. The sharp blade was aimed at the young man's neck. Facing such an attack, Luo Ye gritted his teeth and forced himself to use his strength. This was the value of the existence of low-level transcendence on the battlefield. Using a large number of transcendents in exchange for the enemy's exhaustion to increase the chances of victory. And under such a guiding ideology and the fearless soldier's attacks, as time passed, Luo Ye gradually approached his limit. The battle in the real world was not a legend, nor was it a story in a picture book. The reason why Luo Ye could fight against 10,000 enemies was because of the nature of his strength and the amount of curse power he possessed. But even so, he could no longer hold on. The fierce battle consumed a lot of energy, and the situation of not being able to make ends meet began to appear. The young man who was immersed in the slaughter did not know anything else. Almost an hour later, the desert was completely silent, and the scenery had completely changed. After a brief respite, Luo Ye's mind cleared up slightly. He raised his head and stood on top of the mountain of corpses, looking around. What he saw was the desert filled with corpses, as well as the trembling soldiers who were looking at the youth with fear in their eyes. He was like an immortal monster, but also like a person blessed by the god of war. When he stood on top of thousands of corpses, even the most courageous soldiers lost the courage to wield their swords. After countless battles, the young man's body was covered with countless wounds of various sizes. 3 broken swords were stuck in his back, and a short spear was stuck in his left leg. His body was stained with blood, and his face was blurred under the overflowing curse power. Only his eyes were still shining. An eerie silence began to spread on the battlefield. The kings of the races were hesitant, and the soldiers were scared out of their wits. It was not until the king of the mutants urged them to attack from afar that the 3 monsters began to attack again. A war of attrition. This was a trick that the enemies came up with. Although it was despicable, it was effective. Boom. When everything calmed down again, and the wind and sand dissipated, the mountain of corpses and the sea of blood that was left behind by the previous battle had disappeared. Countless pieces of flesh and blood were scattered all over the ground. The black-haired young man's figure was no longer conspicuous. Instead, he leaned against a giant rock. His hand was holding onto his weapon, and his body was stiff but tenacious. Under countless attacks and fierce battles, indestructible body's recovery could no longer keep up with the damage. Life towards death had been pushed to the limit under the repeated attacks. Luo Yue had used up all his trump cards. Chapter 584. What was the purpose of this battle that could even be considered as a war? It wasn't hard for the initiator of this entire incident to answer this question. For the king of the mutants who lived from ancient times to the present, this was a goal that must be achieved. Even if the girl in front of Roher broke through the first level of the source level and became a saint with a sword, at this moment, she was almost invincible. More importantly, although the sacred sword was powerful, it was far less of a threat to the fallen mutants than the crownstone, which was closer to Shi Yue's strength. And the proof was the current performance of the kings of the races. The king whose blade was shattered stood up and grabbed the soldier's weapon. He looked at the girl who was on the verge of collapsing, his eyes filled with excitement and murderous intent to challenge the limits of the sword. But even so, Wilhelmina was a variable that the king of the mutants didn't want to see. Therefore, he had no choice but to join this dishonorable battle himself. It's over. The dazzling holy sword was brandished for the second time, and a flash of light cut the body of the mutant king in half. It paused for a moment before crumbling into black sludge. On the other side, Wilhelmina's body trembled violently as she fell into the young man's arms. Luo Yue, who caught the girl's body, couldn't help but exclaim in shock. But at the next moment, Luo Yue saw the body of the blue-haired girl. At this moment, the black-haired young man finally understood why the mutants didn't make a move. Normally, she wouldn't be able to wield a sword with this kind of injury. She should have died before Roher, but with this kind of body, she was able to fight until now. Looking at Wilhelmina in this state, Luo Yue's mind went blank. His body trembled uncontrollably. However, the blue-haired girl wasn't sad. She looked at the young man and apologized softly. As a warrior, Luo Yue could accept dying alone in the enemy's camp like a hero. But he couldn't accept the fact that someone important died in front of him to save him. To the young man, this pain and sorrow was far worse than death. It was also something that he couldn't accept or compromise with. Hugging the blue-haired girl's body, the black-haired young man who was covered in blood widened his eyes and made up his mind. But the enemy didn't give Luo Yue much time. They didn't dare to be careless when facing the two of them who were on the verge of death. The strange bird in the sky roared with thunder, the 3-armed giant mutant stood up, and the king of the races with a sword was approaching rapidly. After displaying such talent and strength, both Luo Yue and Wilhelmina were on the must-kill list of the mutants. Without receiving the order from the king of the mutants, the 3 kings of the races pounced on them. They knew that they had to keep the 2 of them here. Once the 2 of them returned to the human camp, the consequences would be unimaginable. To the two of them who were on the verge of death, this could be said to be a desperate situation. Facing such a situation, the black-haired young man had no other choice. Using Wilhelmina's scattered curse as the raw material, the young man lit up the final crown stone. Floating silver mist emerged from Luo Ye's body. Looking at the silver mist, Luo Ye, who was hugging the girl, remained calm. He spoke softly and gave his last order. It was also the biggest gamble of his life. After receiving the order, the silver mist surged faster. Under the illumination of various colors, it opened its mouth and swallowed the two of them. Chapter 585. Luo Ye Akut didn't like to take risks. This was a well-known fact among those around him. It was also a habit that he had cultivated over the years to survive. But it must be emphasized that this wasn't an ironclad rule. When the young lady confessed her love for him, Luo Ye knew that he couldn't lose her. He was willing to pay any price for it. After pondering for a while, the black-haired young man found his answer. As long as both of them had the same physique, Luo Ye's strong regenerative heart had the possibility of reactivating the young lady's heart. This was the only way to save Wilhelmina from the clutches of death. But the moment he thought of this method, Luo Ye was faced with a problem. In the previous battle, Luo Ye's heart had half of it removed by the mutant's king. Even until now, it hadn't recovered. Under such circumstances, removing a part of his heart was undoubtedly suicidal. Even Luo Ye himself was surprised at the madness of this plan. But after some consideration, the black-haired young man decisively chose to carry it out. "Mother, I'm sorry, but please bless me." Dizziness, tinnitus, and coldness assaulted the black-haired young man. His body that was already on the verge of death began to decline rapidly. But even so, the young man who hugged the young lady continued to remove a quarter of his heart with trembling hands. Beat. Success. Did I win the bet? Facts had proven that a mother's love was great. Mother Goddess didn't skimp on the slightest when she reconstructed the body for her beloved child. This indestructible body, that was forged using thousands of years of treasures from various races, had exceeded the limits of a human. And Luo Ye had indeed relied on this to overcome many difficulties. Feeling the soft heartbeat of Wilhelmina in his embrace, the black-haired young man revealed a smile. Wilhelmina survived, and Luo Ye didn't die because of his heart. This could be said to be the best ending that the young man could think of. But it had to be said that everything wasn't over yet. Corroding time breath and devour silver mist were not used much, but the side effects of touch of frozen earth and molten core had begun to appear when the teenager was unconscious. Luo Ye's body had since turned into a battlefield of ice and fire. Wilhelmina's heart was indeed the biggest problem, but other than that, her injuries were just as severe. She had a hideous wound on her chest, burned internal organs, and pierced by broken pieces of her armor. The dragon bloodline's mediocre recovery ability made all of these injuries worse, which would eventually lead to her death. After confirming the plan that he made before he fainted, the black-haired young man forced himself to sit up. He did not know how long he had been unconscious in the dark stone room, but the blood on the ground had not completely dried up. After roughly estimating how long she had been unconscious, Luo Ye looked at the girl beside him. Perhaps it was because the young man's heart was much faster than Wilhelmina's body, the wound on the girl's chest healed faster than other parts of her body. "I see. Is it the will of the sword?" But no matter what, since the girl had removed the negative effects, the most dangerous injury was no longer a threat. Luo Ye began to face the second problem, which was the burned internal organs of the girl. Conventional methods could no longer work, but it was also wrong to say that Luo Ye was completely helpless. After all, according to his previous experience with the heart, Luo Ye only needed to cut the liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys once to reactivate Wilhelmina's internal organs. But the problem was that if Wilhelmina survived after a few cuts, Luo Ye would have to die. Feeling his weak body, the black-haired young man shook his head. He knew that he could no longer accurately cut out the kidneys. On the other hand, Luo Ye did not dare to share the organs with the girl. The reason was simple: the rejection reaction. Right now, Wilhelmina was still in a state of near death. Her strength was still too weak, so the rejection reaction had not happened yet. Once her injuries recovered, the situation would definitely worsen. At that time, her internal organs would reject her, and it would be a life-threatening crisis. After Mother Goddess's painstaking transformation, Luo Ya's body could be said to be full of treasures. Not only his heart, but even his blood contained the blood races, primordial blood. Although the amount was not too high, its recovery ability was very significant. On the other hand, compared to the organs, blood was much safer, especially for the kings of the Source Rank 1 races. Basically, human blood could be absorbed into the body. The moment the blood dripped onto Wilhelmina's burned body, her body that had reached the Source Rank 1 began to automatically absorb the sudden source of energy. Luo Ya could clearly feel that the curse power in Wilhelmina's body became more active, and the recovery speed of her body was much faster than before. After persevering for a few minutes, the black-haired young man muttered to himself. His vision turned black, and he once again fell into a coma. When Luo Ya woke up for the second time, his condition was not much better compared to the first time. In fact, the condition of his body had worsened. Fortunately, after fusing his soul with the 6 disasters, Luo Ya had a strong resistance to the side effects. Even in such a situation, as long as he clenched his teeth, he could temporarily hold on. After sensing his own condition, the black-haired young man stood up again and checked the condition of the girl he cared about the most. But fortunately, it was not without good news. When he approached the girl, Luo Ya discovered that he could already hear Wilhelmina's light breathing. The moment he noticed this, Luo Ya's heart couldn't help but be excited because this meant that the girl's lungs had obviously improved. Under the black-haired young man's efforts, Wilhelmina, who was breathing and had a heartbeat, was basically saved. The only thing left to worry about was her brain. Luo Ya's rescue was carried out after the girl's breath dissipated for dozens of seconds. Although during that period of time, the young man didn't stop transferring vitality, but even so, Luo Ya still couldn't guarantee that the girl's brain didn't suffer any damage. Muttering so, the black-haired young man caressed the girl's cheek. His face revealed a slight sorrow, but he immediately shook his head and pulled himself together. Clenching his teeth, he stood up and began the last task of his plan. In the previous battle, the girl's armor that blocked Luo Ya's joint attack was shattered. The resulting fragments turned into sharp blades that pierced into the girl's body, causing secondary damage. After straightening Wilhelmina's body, the black-haired young man stared at the messy clothes that covered her upper body for a moment. Then, he stretched out his hand and tore the clothes into pieces and threw them aside. Looking clean from the inside out, this sentence was perfect to describe what Luo Ya did to the girl. After sweeping away the last obstacle, Luo Ya finally began his work. One had to admit that this was a rather time-consuming task. There were dozens of armor fragments piercing into Wilhelmina's body. The small ones were fine as they only injured her flesh, but the bigger ones pierced into her internal organs. It was very troublesome. Although the frozen touch, cold air was used as a weapon most of the time, it could actually achieve a numbing effect in a very small amount. Although the girl shouldn't be able to feel the pain, Luo Ya still couldn't bear to do this surgery without doing anything. She couldn't sleep yet. After spending more than a day, the black-haired young man finally completed his task. As for the rest of the time, Luo Ya could only leave it to fate and Wilhelmina. He prayed that the girl would be able to overcome this obstacle and wake up completely. Reaching out his hand to caress the girl's pale face, Luo Ya's eyes were filled with heartache and tenderness. The exhausted young man looked at Wilhelmina for a long time before finally leaning against the wall and falling asleep. Not long after he fell asleep, the unconscious girl murmured in her sleep, "Luo Ya." Chapter 586. Dreams. This was probably one of the fairest things in the world. Some people were in their bedrooms in the palace, some were in the streets without any shelter, some were in their peaceful homes, and some were in the middle of a fierce battle in the military camp. But no matter what, this didn't affect the dream itself. In the dream, the black-haired boy wasn't himself, but rather from a third-person perspective, watching the life of another girl. Wilhelmina's memories were, to a certain extent, very simple. Most of them were only about one thing, and that was to become stronger. In Wilhelmina's memories, her childhood was always dark. During this period of time, rather than saying that she was willing to work hard, it was more accurate to say that she was forced. Countless times, the girl who practiced swordsmanship to the point where her hands were bleeding would cry in her room while looking at the heroes in the storybooks, full of doubts about the so-called vow. But fortunately, perhaps due to the passage of time, these memories didn't last for too long. The girl who grew up a little firmed her will. During this period of time, becoming stronger, fulfilling the vow, and protecting the glory of her family and the human world was Wilhelmina's own wish. This situation continued until the moment when the two met and clashed, and the girl's heart sword was broken in front of Luoya. Wilhelmina's reluctance towards herself finally came to an end. The boy brought her liberation, and at the same time, gave her a new goal and faith. Looking at the girl who nervously clenched her fists and asked Teresa about her condition, Luoya couldn't help but smile helplessly, but at the same time, he was filled with regret. Since young, other than becoming stronger and fulfilling the vow, she didn't have to think about anything else. This kind of environment made the girl very clumsy when it came to relationships, and she didn't know how to express it. She could only swing her sword, and continuously swing her sword, infusing all her emotions into her sword intent. At the moment when she swept away her sense of inferiority, confusion, and weakness, the courage, origin substance truly acknowledged the girl, and the heart sword finally broke through the obstacles and swept away all the haze. That sword that swept through the heavens and earth could be said to be the girl's confession to the boy. Luoya, goodbye. In the dim stone room, the sleeping black-haired boy suddenly jolted. Intense grief and pain woke Luoya up from his dream. He then opened his eyes wide and called out the girl's name as he groped around. The moment his fingers touched the girl beside him, Luoya's panicked emotions calmed down a little. He panted loudly, holding the girl's body in his arms as if he was afraid of something. He listened to the heartbeat that was much stronger than before. After a long time, the young man's emotions slowly calmed down. After calming down, Luoya couldn't help but recall the previous dream. He shook his head slightly and looked at the young lady in his arms with a solemn expression. The reason was simple. It was because the previous dream was too realistic. Could it be because of your heart? Were those your dreams? Now that the connection between the two was infinitely close due to the heart, blood, and other factors, the curse power of the two in their dreams could possibly affect the dream. If Luoya's dream really belonged to the girl, it meant that there was nothing wrong with Wilhelmina's brain. She might even wake up after Luoya. When Wilhelmina's whisper entered his ears and her orange eyes opened again, Luoya didn't even have time to react. He looked at the girl and his heartbeat quickened. The excitement in his heart couldn't be described with words. After thinking for a moment, the black-haired girl replied with a slightly choked voice. Chapter 587. Rejection was undoubtedly a life-threatening reaction. Even Wilhelmina, who had reached Source Rank 1, didn't dare to say that she could overcome this reaction. But facing the choice given by Luoya, the girl resolutely chose the second option. The reason was simple. The second option was risky and the success rate wasn't high, but once it succeeded, Wilhelmina's body would no longer have any hidden dangers. The recovery ability of Source Rank 1 would be fully unleashed. With the help of her heart, the girl's injuries would be healed in a few days. Most importantly, Luoya's burden would be greatly reduced. That was, the boy's injuries didn't improve at all. Luoya's hands were cold, even colder than the heavily injured Wilhelmina. And in terms of heartbeat, Luoya's situation was even worse. The girl in his arms could clearly feel that the boy's heartbeat was even weaker than an ordinary person without supernatural powers. But apart from that, there were some things that Wilhelmina didn't want to change. Hey, is this the encouragement you were talking about? Looking at Wilhelmina, who made a rather cute request, Luoya couldn't help but bitterly smile. But after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it wasn't surprising. She was simple and clumsy, and she didn't know how to act coquettishly. After all, according to Wilhelmina's father, Friedrich's training method, the girl didn't have anyone to act coquettishly with. Once she showed it, she would be criticized as weak. Is this okay? Will your body hurt? Ah, that, I tore it off when I was treating your wounds. Hearing Luo Ye's explanation, the grey-blue-haired girl went silent for a moment before replying. Her pale cheeks flushed red, and the black-haired boy was speechless for a moment. I'm sorry, I didn't ask for your permission. What do you mean? What are you talking about? If there was someone in the world who understood a girl's body the most, it would be the black-haired boy who bore the brunt of it. Thus, he had the most right to speak about Wilhelmina's feminine charms. Supple and smooth skin, well-developed and tall breasts, a slim waist without a trace of excess fat, and a perky but that was exceptionally charming. She had a devilish figure. Compared to the nobles who lived like princes, the young lady's body was almost perfect. Really? If that's the case, that's good. Chapter 588. In the room filled with the aroma of wine, the black-haired boy stared at the handwriting on the wine barrel in front of him. He stood there in a daze for a moment, then he suddenly raised his hand and cast an illumination spell. The surprised expression on Luo Ye's face slowly calmed down and was replaced by a dignified expression. After standing there and thinking for a while, the black-haired boy walked into the depths of the wine cellar and found that although the wine on the wine rack was of different years, the column where it was brewed was the same. Now that things had come to this, the black-haired youth had no choice but to admit the fact that the building he was now in, the massive fortress, was the Tak Fortress, an important stronghold of the theocracy that had gone missing years ago. It was a gathering of 100,000 elites and many high-tier extraordinary individuals. Hidden Fog, that was the most mature and most terrifying, 6 disasters, that Luo Ye had ever seen. It was also a monster that the boy didn't want to face even if he reached source level 2. However, the reality now was that Luo Ye was likely to be in its territory. Thinking of this, Luo Ye raised his eyebrows speechlessly, and a strong worry rose in his heart for a while. 1 second. Remember this time, Luo Ye took the risk to use Devour of the Silver Fog to devour him without being discovered. The boy thought that there should be 2 reasons. The first reason was naturally that the time was too short. Devour of the Silver Fog only took a few seconds from use to deactivation. The second reason was that Luo Ye and Wilhelmina's condition was too bad. Suddenly there was a source level 1 and a source level 2 in their stomach. No matter how slow Hidden Fog was, it would notice it sooner or later. At that time, it would definitely take action against them. In other words, Luo Ye and Wilhelmina's time here was not infinite. The further they stayed, the more dangerous it would be. When Hidden Fog devoured Tucker Fortress, there were more than 100,000 people stationed there, but now Luo Ye couldn't see a single person. Not to mention other things, the state of this wine cellar was very strange. It had to be said that this situation was too abnormal and unrealistic. In Luo Ye's opinion, it was a little strange. However, if he wanted to know the truth, he would have to leave the underground facility and explore the surface, which was a little unrealistic for the current youth. After understanding this, Luo Ye immediately took action. He pulled the bag aside and filled it with a dozen bottles of good fruit wine. Then he opened the door and cast the illumination spell again. Quietly walking into the house and closing the door, Luo Ye leaned against the wall and slowly sat down, slightly relieved. He arranged Hydra to guard one side, then looked at the grey-blue-haired girl and fell into deep thought. When the time comes, with the support of the ancient gods, it wouldn't be a problem for them to recover their combat strength. However, at that time, in order to avoid being discovered by Hidden Fog, Luo Ye and Wilhelmina would have to leave. After returning, they would probably still land in the desert where they left. The 2 of them couldn't fight a war against another race, especially under the premise that the other side had the existence of the mutants' king. It was inevitable that they would need support. According to the previous schedule, in 2 days' time, Luo Ye and Nuo Arya would rendezvous. 2 days' time, huh? Let's hope that more people will come. The black-haired youth began to recover his body in his sleep. In the distant fortress, a girl looked at the letter on the table and frowned strangely. In the eastern front line, fought news belonging to the Austin Empire. The black-haired, purple-eyed girl frowned and looked at the letter on the table in front of her silently. On the side, the maid Audrey was arranging the table while paying attention to the movements of Her Royal Highness. Chapter 589. Lillian was a genius. Be it in the past or present, this was something that all teachers of any subject would recognize. The letter sent by Nuo Arya was undoubtedly laughable if one were to consider it solely from a military perspective. One might even suspect that it was purposely trying to make things difficult for Audrey, which was why Audrey expressed her disgust. But after careful consideration, Lillian felt that something was amiss. So if one were to eliminate the possibility of Nuo Arya stirring up trouble and look at the letter without prejudice, one would be able to discover a lot of problems. Your Highness, do you mean that this letter wasn't written by the princess? A hint. Even though Nuo Arya's letter was simple and clear, the language style was poles apart from the usual. Yet, it was written by the young lady herself, which was something that bothered Lillian a lot. After giving it some thought, the young lady could only think of one possibility. As for the reason, Lillian had more or less guessed it. It was likely that the Austin Empire was monitoring Lillian. Her Highness the Empress's battle achievements were outstanding and she had become an indispensable force in the alliance. Unless the mutants were wiped out, it was almost impossible to touch her on the surface. But one of the consequences of the apparent unity between the two sides was that the Austin Empire's surveillance of Lillian was getting stricter. The conflict between Lucas and Lillian, as well as the surveillance of the Austin Empire's spy system, was something that the Nuo Arya, as the princess and successor of the theocracy, was definitely aware of. That was why she used this method to hint that Lillian had something that she couldn't disclose. But even so, the black-haired, purple-eyed young lady still couldn't make a decision easily. No, Your Highness. There hasn't been any information about this operation leaked. The young lady narrowed her purple eyes as she muttered to herself. She felt that the situation was getting increasingly strange. The maid beside her also fell into deep thought. What exactly is the theocracy of Saint Maister trying to do? Your Highness, the surveillance of our country is getting tighter. If we send out troops rashly, it is likely to provoke His Majesty and cause trouble for our future operations. So, what you mean is, upon hearing Lillian's thoughts, Audrey couldn't help but widen her eyes in shock. Even though Lillian didn't turn out in full force, sending out such a core force was enough to show her sincerity. Frankly speaking, Audrey felt that sending out 100,000 elite troops based on a single letter was too much of a reaction. But looking at Lillian, who had made her decision, the maid didn't say anything else. Then, Your Highness, it's almost time for dinner. After dealing with the Nuo Arya's letter, the black-haired, purple-eyed girl looked at the sky outside the window. She stood up from her desk and walked to the dining table. Audrey began to serve the food that was already prepared. Due to mutation, the bodies of extraordinary individuals could survive without eating. However, the children in their wombs were born with mortal bodies. Babies who were unable to absorb magic essence could only rely on food for nourishment. This situation could not be changed, and the only thing Lillian could do was adapt. While tasting the food in her mouth, Lillian's expression remained unchanged, but her gaze at her abdomen became gentler. Audrey, who stood at the side, finally felt relieved and asked about her recent feelings. Your Highness, have you been feeling unwell recently? If so, please tell me in time so that I can deal with it. I feel like my spell power has been lacking recently. Literally. The consumption is greater than in the past, and I haven't found the reason. Even though Lillian was powerful, her physical condition had been unstable in the past year. Compared to various other problems, the lack of spell power wasn't a big deal at all. Besides, there were many possible reasons, such as a new round of body mutation, or to make up for the wounds left behind in previous battles. Even though the other party was powerful, under the siege of Lillian's endless army of the ancient Austin Empire, the ruler of the race chose to retreat. But in this battle, the young lady's arm was slightly injured. At this thought, Audrey wasn't nervous. But with the principle of being cautious, the maid decided to go through the procedures seriously. Yes, I'm almost done with today's official business. Don't worry. Usually, before going to bed, Her Highness would read some literature. This had always been her hobby, but for some reason, she felt a little uneasy today. In the distance, the soldiers on the city walls guarded the city in silence under the illumination of the torches. Their gazes toward the plains were meticulous. The sound of the patrol's boots landing on the ground was uniform, as though they were soldiers being inspected. Lillian, who stood high above, looked at the scene and nodded in satisfaction. Then, she gazed at the stars in the sky in silence. Perhaps it was related to her or the people around her. In such a situation, the success rate was at least 50%. It was due to this reason that Lillian didn't dare to be careless. She walked out of the room and checked the surroundings. In other words, is the problem on my side? Recently, Lillian had been feeling that the spell power in her body was inexplicably draining away. She had mentioned this to Audrey. But what the young lady didn't mention was that she had a vague feeling that the spell power in her body wasn't draining away. Instead, it was being devoured. Gazing at the vast night sky, the black-haired, purple-eyed young lady's eyes glinted with worry. She pondered over the problem in her mind and subconsciously placed her hand on her abdomen. This unborn little life seemed to be a little unusual. When a human baby was in its mother's body, it could only survive on the nutrients and energy brought by ordinary food and couldn't absorb the spell power formed by magic elements. This was an iron law since ancient times and also the reason why Lillian had to eat every day. In the beginning, Lillian thought that it was because of the king's blood. But she quickly denied this possibility. After all, putting aside the fact that the king's blood had always needed to be awakened, even her parents, Luoya and Lillian, were only ordinary people when they were born. Giants, dragons, angels, and other races that disappeared in ancient times grew by absorbing spell power in their embryos. They were born with extraordinary powers, which was also why they were called mythical races. But this situation obviously didn't apply to Lillian and Luoya, who were both humans. After pondering for a long time, this thought emerged in the black-haired young lady's mind. She let out a helpless sigh, turned around, and headed back to her bedroom to rest. But the moment she was about to enter her room, a faint radiance appeared behind her all of a sudden. The young lady widened her eyes abruptly. The moment she sensed the radiance, Lillian turned around abruptly. The spell power in her body erupted instantly, and the barrier against assassins expanded rapidly and shrouded her. At the same time, heavily armored knights appeared on both sides of the young lady. Ancient Austin's mags hovered in the air and filled in the gaps in the defense. At that moment, at the edge of the balcony, where Lillian stood, a figure emanating a faint radiance appeared out of nowhere. It was a young girl with her eyes shut. Her pitch-black hair fluttered in the wind. Her skin was fair, and her appearance was adorable. Despite her young age, one could already tell that she would be a devastatingly beautiful woman in the future. At this thought, the young lady's gaze sharpened. The knights around her swarmed forward immediately. At the same time, the little girl at the end of the balcony opened her eyes. Her golden eyes widened abruptly when she saw Lillian. Then, she uttered a word as if by reflex. She did it. She really did it. No, that's not right. Now isn't the time to talk about that. Staring at the little girl who was only a few years old and whose hair and pupils were almost the same color as Luoya's, Lillian, who hadn't returned to her senses from the shock, asked subconsciously. But before she spoke, the little girl suddenly yelled at her. The young lady spoke as though she wanted to tell Lillian something. But halfway through her sentence, the radiance on her body flickered and her voice was cut off. At the next moment, the young lady vanished as though she had never appeared in this world. It was at that moment that Lillian returned to her senses from her astonishment. Gazing at the empty space where the little girl vanished, Lillian stared blankly for a moment before dashing forward. However, be it the little girl or the radiance, there was nothing there. At the thought of how the little girl addressed her, the black-haired young lady couldn't help but widen her eyes again. She stood on the balcony in a daze for a moment. But at the next moment, Lillian suddenly recalled the words that the little girl left for her. If that child is real, wouldn't her so-called father be? Right now, Lillian didn't have any clues about Luo Yue at all. Even if she wanted to save her, where could she go? The moment she recalled the little girl's words, a strong sense of dissonance rose in Lillian's heart all of a sudden. After pondering for a moment, she turned around abruptly and looked at the room behind her. At this thought, Lillian turned around abruptly, rushed into the study, and picked up the letter on the desk. She stared at the words that she couldn't understand and her eyes glinted. Chapter 590. Indestructible Body. This was a body created by the Mother Goddess in the ancient times for the young man by chance. It was also the reason why Luo Yue didn't really die after he returned from the historical fragment. That was a deep sleep without dreams. The dark stone room didn't provide any time information to the young man's biological clock. When Luo Yue's consciousness floated up again, the first thing he felt was the softness under his body. Fragrance. Turning his eyes away unnaturally, the black-haired young man cursed silently in his heart. A knee pillow, and it was the knee pillow of the serious Miss Knight. He had to admit that this was beyond Luo Yue's expectations. However, thanks to the young lady, Luo Yue's mind quickly cleared up due to the rapid blood flow. The moment her orange-red eyes fell on the young man, Wilhelmina let out a sigh of relief. Then, she excitedly reached out her hand to touch the young man's cheek. Oh, that's still okay. My body is much lighter now. The wound on his back and the injury on his left leg had already healed. As for the bones in his body, most of the slight bone fractures had already healed. The remaining ones were also constantly recovering. Minna, how do you feel? No, that's why I said you don't need to thank me, it's okay. My legs didn't suffer much injuries. It won't be a burden. Also, this is one of my thanks. You're almost naked now. Not to mention that the part that covered your lower abdomen had turned into strips of cloth. There was even a hole in your chest. Coupled with the perfect body that the Miss Knight had trained for many years, that kind of half-hidden charm was really too impactful. Luo Yue, did you bring that wine back from the outside? I just saw it when I was drinking. It said that it was produced in Tucker Fortress. What exactly is this? Looking at the young lady who carefully said that while looking at Luo Yue as if she was afraid of provoking him, the black-haired young man couldn't help but fall into a short silence. It's okay. My ability to accept things is still very strong. You don't have to look at me like that. After saying that helplessly, the black-haired young man's expression turned serious. After thinking for a moment, he said softly. Chapter 591. Shi Yue's long-distance communication could be said to be the most expensive and most demanding way of communication in the world. Therefore, no matter what type of long-distance communication curse vessel it was, the cost was 6 digits of gold coins. It was an exclusive equipment that only the great aristocrats of various countries could have. But even with such a high price, there were often problems with communication. With this understanding, the Ackett family, which wasn't rich at all, dug out a lot of money and invested a lot in this area, making Ackett territory the second territory in the church after the royal family to have the ability to communicate with each other. Therefore, at the moment when she saw the last record on the curse vessel, Wilhelmina asked Luo Yue this question. However, the black-haired young man was not too surprised after a slight pause. Although Nuo Arya did not tell Luo Yue the truth at that time in order not to let the young man worry, the Holy See, who perceived the unfavorable situation, sent Luo Yue to Tuck Fortress. In other words, the Holy See wanted to get in touch with Luo Yue at that time, and this might be the record at that time. Coincidence? No, it's impossible. Hearing Luo Yue's explanation, the grey-blue-haired girl immediately denied it, making the black-haired young man a little surprised. Seeing this, Wilhelmina was silent for a moment, then she spoke again with a serious face. After I went missing? Wait, that means, staring at Wilhelmina who said so with a serious face, Luo Yue's body stiffened for a while. After a while, the young man's face changed suddenly. He stepped forward and looked at the last record on the curse vessel. He sorted out the girl's words in his mind, and his eyes widened uncontrollably. So, who could this person be? But after a little thought, Luo Yue denied this possibility, and the reason was very simple. That was, if Mother Goddess really wanted to contact, she didn't need these communication curse vessels at all, and it was impossible for her to know the equipment number of the Akut family. After excluding the possibility of Mother Goddess, Luo Yue could only think of one person. Thinking of the silver-haired girl who was currently missing, Luo Yue's pupils suddenly shrank, and Wilhelmina also nodded slowly with a serious face. On the other hand, as the person in charge of the family's intelligence, Ari Lisi was familiar with the communication curse vessel. If she really came here, it was reasonable to use the curse vessel to contact the outside world. As for why the girl could move freely here instead of disappearing inexplicably like others, Luo Yue also had a guess in his mind. Thinking of this, Luo Yue suddenly became excited. He was stunned for a moment, then he turned around and wanted to go out to look for the girl, but Wilhelmina grabbed his arm. There are still many places I haven't been. Chapter 592. Space Curse. This has always been the goal of the Cursemances in Shi Ya world. However, after thousands of years, the results of countless generations of efforts were very few. Wait, Luo Yue, do you really want to do this? But, this is too dangerous, and there is no evidence to prove that this is useful. Hearing Wilhelmina's words, Luo Yue couldn't help but fall into silence. But in the young man's heart, he didn't dispel the idea of doing this. This world where there was no one, and time almost stopped was only the first layer, and in the deeper part, Luo Yue could vaguely feel something, and it was likely to be the victims of the Tucker Fortress incident that the young man had been looking for. Luo Yue, my bloodline can transform into a giant dragon, do you still remember? What if I immediately transform into a giant dragon after leaving here and fly out with you? How about this tactic? Indeed, but at that time, there will be external support, and it should be held back by the human side source level 1. In that case, after listening to Wilhelmina's plan, the black-haired young man fell into silence for a while, but after thinking for a moment, he shook his head and said the existence that made him most afraid. Although he had experienced several battles, in fact, so far, Luo Yue almost didn't collect any information about him, and he knew nothing about him. On the contrary, whether it was Luo Yue or Wilhelmina, they had been completely seen through in the previous battle, and the effect of the attack was likely to be greatly reduced. Before, the war between humans and mutants was in a relatively balanced state, but with the appearance of the Mutants King, the balance began to tilt greatly. The human side was already in a disadvantageous situation, and they must increase some chips. Thinking of this, Luo Yue strengthened his will, and Wilhelmina, who failed to persuade him, sighed. Looking at the black-haired young man's expression, the girl knew that her persuasion was useless, but even so, Wilhelmina still wanted to remind him. Wilhelmina, I said this not to weaken your fighting spirit, but to save the soldiers in Tucker Fortress. This is undoubtedly a magnificent feat, and whether it is successful or not, I think it is right. What I want to tell you is that I've always been with you. Hearing Wilhelmina's words, Roha's golden eyes slowly widened. The girl saw this and smiled. She came over and took Roha's hand. She looked at his eyes and said softly, "Yeah. Then, I'll be right back." After an emotional farewell, Luo Yue let go of his hand and took a step back. The crown stone in his body was once again activated and bloomed with radiance. The next moment, the drifting white mist appeared again and covered the boy's body in an instant. Inside Tucker Fortress, a black-haired young man was hiding in the white fog. At this moment, at the edge of the Harvey Desert, inside the tents of the frontline army, a meeting was being held. The average age of the generals continued to decrease. This was no longer news. In fact, it was not just the generals. The average age of the entire Alliance army was decreasing. However, this was not a planned replacement of the old with new blood, but an inevitable result of the cruelty of war. Under such circumstances, the younger generation had no choice but to step onto the battlefield and carry the banner left by the older generation. Under the background of cruel war and the continuous increase of magic concentration, they grew up at an astonishing speed. At the front of the meeting table, an unusually tall man and a cold-looking blonde woman in armor sat on the left and right sides of the long table. They were Luo Ya's two old acquaintances, Geert Gust and Brittany Lund. The reason why they were at the front of the table was because of the rules of the Alliance Army. Among the people in the meeting room, Giant, Geert's assault squad was ranked first in terms of kills. His total kill count was over 30,000. The second was Valkyrie, Brittany, who was also part of the assault squad. Her total kill count was over 24,000. However, compared to when they were still in the academy, whether it was Gort or Brittany, who made a lot of deals with Roher because of some hobbies, both of them were no longer as naive as they were when they were students. Behind the two of them were Berserk Beast, Selena's mountain squad with a total kill count of 20,000, and Queen of the Night, Juliana's night assault squad with a total kill count of 18,000. The 4 seats at the front were occupied by the 4 famous members of the Golden Generation. More than half of the seats at the back were occupied by familiar faces from St. Freya Academy. Many of them were even members of the Purple Rose faction that Luo Ya belonged to. Indeed. But if we want to graduate, we can't do it without the leader of Rosette Dawn, be it the former leader or the current leader. The former military advisor of Blue Rose's faction had now become a staff officer of the Joint Army's General Staff Department. Stuart, who had a unique ability, had made many contributions and became the staff officer of the Intelligence Department. However, the two of them, who held high positions, did not put on any airs when they talked. I see. You and Brittany are indeed cadres of the Leaders' Society. I seem to have helped you a lot back then. But are you getting married? You were so against it back then. The grey-haired man gazed at the young lady's blindfolded eyes and lamented in his heart. Upon hearing his words, Stuart also sensed something and didn't ask further. Instead, he turned to the crowd that was whispering to each other. Well, except for the Austin Empire's part, almost all of them are here. That's all we have right now. But everyone here is indebted to the minister. In times like this, we can still rely on our own people and have a strong will to save others. 300,000. This was the intelligence that Stuart brought to him regarding the mutants' military strength in the Harvey Desert. It was obviously more than the current human military strength of 200,000. As a staff officer, Jarek knew that this number was still increasing. Before I came here, I used my eyes to take a look. There are at least 10,000 more people every day. After hearing the latest news from Stuart, Jarek couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Even though everyone present was an elite unit of the Alliance, and Brittany and the others were a renowned trump card unit, the difference in numbers of over 100,000 was still a little too great. Is there any news from the Austin Empire? Jarek sighed and couldn't help but look at the tent at the back. Stuart followed his gaze and both of them exchanged glances. At the same time, they silently prayed that the young ladies who were the leaders over there could bring them some good news. Jarek and Stuart placed their hopes on the two young ladies in the Alliance Army's upper echelons. However, in the tent at the back, the two famous commanders on the front lines were having an intense argument. The reason was the issue of military strength. In the most intense battle of Stanlow last year, the Alliance Army was the main force and defended against the army led by the 4 kings of the mutants. In that battle, the Alliance Army suffered heavy casualties. John of the Holy See was also injured. On the other hand, the enemy lost one of their kings. Didn't I say it before? It doesn't matter even if you inform the Austin Empire. Otherwise, how are you going to break through the blockade of 300,000 mutants? Who can understand that kind of thing? If you tell that woman the truth, she will definitely help with all her might. In the room, Shia Luote's body trembled slightly. She grabbed Nuo Arius' collar in anger. On the other side, the blonde girl fell into silence after hearing the elf lady's words. As the number of people involved increased, the nearing of the incident, and Shia Luote's actions, arbiter of fate, astrology results would become inaccurate or even ineffective. In other words, for this rescue operation of Luo Ya, Shia Luote's astrology results were the most accurate when she first received the news. However, What Xia Luote didn't expect was that the result she obtained after paying a huge price didn't receive any attention from Nuo Arya. This turned this operation into a situation where they were outnumbered and their chances of winning were greatly reduced. You should know what this operation represents, right? What the hell are you thinking? If this fails, how do you expect me to calm down in this situation? Why did you ignore my astrology? The reason is simple. Because we don't think the Austin Empire is trustworthy. No, of course not. Human countries can indeed trust each other. At first, I thought so too. But don't you think the Austin Emperor's attitude towards Luo Ya is strange? But what if Lucas might be a cultist? The moment she heard Nuo Arya's words, the red-haired girl suddenly widened her eyes. She looked at Miss Angel with a dumbfounded expression, but then she quickly recovered and shook her head. If we think about it logically, that is indeed the case. Right now, we don't have any evidence, but don't you think it's strange? In the last full-scale battle, the Austin Empire army under Lucas suffered almost no losses. As the king of the Source Level 1 race, he was not attacked by the king of the mutants. Hearing Nuo Arya's words, Xia Luote fell into silence for a while. She wanted to refute Nuo Arya's words, but she didn't know how to say it. Because not only Nuo Arya, but many people, including Xia Luote, also felt strange about this matter after the war. The king of the first source-level race in the human camp was clearly the main target of the mutants. In order to avoid being targeted, the first source-level races of the various countries had no choice but to move in secret. However, even in such an environment, Lucas, who appeared on the front lines, seemed to have entered an uninhabited land. In fact, since Luo Ya's disappearance, Lucas has been targeted by the Scholar Country and the Vatican. That's right. At that time, the believers of the Savior created a diversion and lured Dean Antonio and the others over. But if you think about it carefully, there is a condition for this matter. That is, the Austin Empire will not interfere and watch them operate in their territory. Nuo Arya's voice became heavy. Xia Luote's eyes widened slightly as doubts emerged in her heart. That's right. The collector is wanted and the danger is known to all. The Austin Emperor, who is the only ruler, actually allowed the Fallen to set up a stronghold in his territory. This is too strange. Xia Luote, it's not that we don't value your astrology, but Lucas is too suspicious. He may not be a cultist, but he must have some relationship with the cultists. This is why we didn't inform the Austin Empire of our plan in advance. After slightly nodding to express her understanding, Xia Luote let go of the girl's clothes and asked with a worried face. Hearing Xia Luote's question, Miss Angel fell into silence. She turned around and looked at the envelope on the table behind her. Her blue eyes gradually became firm. Nuo Arya said as she slowly clenched her hands. Xia Luote also fell into silence. However, what the two didn't know was that their thoughts were in vain, but in a good direction. At this time, in the west of the Harvey Desert, on the Tucker Plains, a large army was rapidly moving east. The flags were fluttering like the clouds and moving like the wind. Chapter 593. The Crown Stone had always been one of Luo Ya Akkad's core powers. The young man's understanding of the Crown Stone had also made a qualitative leap in the process of the most recent historical fragment. The previous Tucker Fortress, although the stone structure seemed to be abnormally sturdy, in fact, from the perspective of space, the fortress inside the hidden mist was actually weaker than the land in the real world. And the place that Luo Ya wanted to go to was even weaker than the Tucker Fortress. In the past, many scholars who studied space had died in such a situation. It was precisely because of this that Wilhelmina was particularly worried before. But in fact, Luo Ya had a backup plan. Although the rejection reaction had been overcome, Luo Ya's heart still wouldn't be completely assimilated in a short period of time. Therefore, it became a coordinate for the young man to return to the past. As long as Wilhelmina was there, Luo Ya wouldn't lose his direction and couldn't find the way back. According to his previous experience, the starting point of the Devourer of the Silver Mist spatial transfer and landing point were not the same place. The previous Tucker fortress was very safe, but this didn't mean that the next destination would be safe. When the nearby darkness receded, the young man was no longer in the Tucker fortress. Instead, he was in an exquisite palace. This was the place where the young man once lived, fought, and had a deep and unforgettable memory. It was one of the 3 shrines that worshipped Shi-Ya in ancient times, the Tower of Babel. For Luo-Ya Akkad, the Tower of Babel was a dreamlike place. However, in the last historical fragment, Luo-Ya came with the intention of making up for the regrets of his ancestors. But he didn't expect that in the Tower of Babel, which he thought was the most dangerous place, he would receive an unexpected feeling. He received the love of others, and he also made up for the part that he was missing in the depths of his heart that he didn't want to admit. The love of parents may not be important to adults, and all kinds of movies and TV shows were even more popular with orphans. But in fact, most people couldn't grow up without their parents. Whether it was a father's love or a mother's love, it was an important part of a child's mental health. Luodia's mother, Maria, was from the Viscount family of St. Maister. She passed away due to illness when she was still a child. In terms of rank, there was actually a gap between her family and the Akkad family. However, Kaadia and Maria fell in love freely, and they even fell in love on campus. In that era, it could be said that it was very enviable, so in reality, there wasn't too much trouble. That was basically all that Luo-Ya knew about Maria. Most of it came from Kaadia and some of his servants' descriptions. As for her image, the only portrait he had was when the 2 of them got married. Kaadia found a famous artist in the Holy City to draw a portrait of her. In that portrait, Maria was a gentle and beautiful young lady, and the smile on her face was very charming. If the birth mother was Luo-Ya's mother as a human, then the mother goddess would be the young man's mother as the chosen king. She was also the mother of all living beings in the world. And it was also her appearance that filled the void in the young man's heart. Looking at the familiar temple in front of him and recalling every detail of the 2 of them here, even someone as strong as Luo-Ya couldn't help but feel a ripple in his heart. After being stunned for a moment, the black-haired young man couldn't help but move his feet, as if he was looking for something as he shuttled through the familiar temple. It's not here. Fog of concealment, did it devour the Holy Tower in the ancient era? In that final battle in the ancient era, whether it was the Mother Goddess or the 6 calamities, they all fell into a long slumber. The real Holy Tower had long been destroyed in the endless flames of war. This place was probably just a space created by the memories of the fog of concealment. As for the target that Luo-Ya was originally looking for, in fact, it had already appeared in front of the young man's eyes. Luo-Ya didn't know what the rules of this space were, but it was obvious that the people of Tucker Fortress had already become a part of the Silver Mist. Chapter 594. For an enemy who was about to fight, investigating intelligence was a basic task. From a warrior's point of view, it was a form of respect for the enemy and also for himself. From Luo-Ya's point of view, it was a form of insurance. And this time, his opponent was the king of the mutated people. It was indeed strange. Until now, Luo-Ya still couldn't figure out his opponent's fighting style. In desperation, he could only try his luck with the Gulan Dea who was from the same era as him. However, he didn't expect the giant skeleton to say so. The king of the beast men, Bangar, this name was well known in our era. I'm also quite familiar with it. After all, the beast men were one of the races under the savior. Their numbers were also the largest among the total forces. Well, they were one of the few races that had a lot of speaking rights under the dragons and angels. The beast men, as one of the main fighting forces under the savior, compared to other races, they must have a closer relationship with the savior. After the savior fell, the races that were more closely related to him would be more affected. The birth of the mutated people was probably because of this. Well, at that time, I was already here, so I didn't know anything about the outside world. I think so. However, compared to their army, you should be more worried about Bangar because he is in existence on the same level as us. Looking at the giant who said so, the black-haired young man blinked and fell into silence. His expression was extremely solemn. The existence at the top of a race, such a monster had long ceased to exist in this era of humans. The Grim Reaper who assassinated Luo Ya in the previous historical fragments couldn't be compared to him at all. It could be said that he was a powerful enemy that had never appeared before. More importantly, Bangar was different from the other king of the beast men. Relying on curses? Idiots with strong muscles looked down on cursemoncers. This situation also existed among humans now. For example, the country of knights which valued martial arts, and it was even more so for races like the beast men. Bangar's bloodline ability isn't just a simple attack. It's also a type of curses. Now that you have been attacked by him, your chances of winning against him will be even lower. Yes, we were on the same side and cooperated before. He was one of the few people I recognized in that era. Originally, I thought that under his leadership, the beast men could reach a new peak. I didn't expect that the end result would be destruction. Looking at the Gulandea, which was a rare sight to see, Luo Ya's golden pupils slowly contracted. He further realized the strength of the enemy this time. However, it was obvious that even if it was an old friend from ancient times, it would not show mercy to Luo Ya. On the contrary, it might use its familiarity with the giants to counter Luo Ya. On the plains, the two of them exchanged information about the enemy. However, what the black-haired young man didn't know was that an unknown meeting was also taking place in the royal city. In the courtyard of the Divine Tower, the black-haired young man gradually fell into a deep sleep. In front of him, who was shrouded in a faint light, the white-haired witch did not immerse herself in her new task. Instead, the smile on her face slowly disappeared. She silently looked at the sleeping Luo Ya. Unlike when he was awake, Luo Ya had a unique sense of calmness. Although his body, which had been on the battlefield for a long time, seemed to be fine, there were many small wounds on his body. After completely relaxing his cheeks, a sense of fatigue emerged. Altatia's scarlet eyes contracted slightly. After carefully staring at Luo Ya in front of her for a long time, she couldn't help but slowly move closer. She took a step forward and reached out her hand, carefully touching the sleeping young man's cheeks as if she was touching fragile glass. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.